Get out of my house and take your cheap, embarrassing body with you." Nathaniel's voice cut through the room like glass. He snatched the pearl necklace from Isabella's throat with one sharp pull, pressed it into Celeste's hand, then shoved the divorce papers across the marble table, hard enough that they scattered onto the floor. "Pick them up," he said coldly, "and sign them. You have nothing without me, you've always had nothing." Isabella stood completely still. She did not cry, she did not beg. She bent down, gathered the paper, placed them back on the table, and walked out the door without a single word. If this story already has your blood boiling, you are in exactly the right place. Subscribe to our channel right now, turn on the notification bell, and follow this story all the way to the end, because what Isabella does next will change the way you think about strength, silence, and what it truly means to walk away. And drop a comment below telling us what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. The dinner table had always been Nathaniel Whitmore's favorite stage. He liked the way the chandelier light caught the crystal glasses. He liked the way the staff moved quietly around the edges of the room, invisible unless summoned. He liked the way guests leaned toward him when he spoke, hungry for whatever wisdom a man with $4 billion and a face on the cover of Forbes might share. Nathaniel Whitmore had built his life like a cathedral, every detail chosen, every angle considered, every person in their proper place. Isabella had been in her proper place for 8 years. She stood in the kitchen most evenings while Nathaniel entertained. She made sure the canapes were warm and the wine was the right vintage and the conversation flowed without friction. She smiled when she was supposed to smile. She disappeared when she was supposed to disappear. She had learned slowly and painfully the unspoken rules of being Nathaniel Whitmore's wife, and she had followed them without complaint, because she had genuinely believed that underneath all the performance, underneath all the marble and crystal and curated ambition, there was a man who loved her. She had been wrong about a lot of things in her 27 years. That belief was the one that would cost her the most. It was a Thursday evening in late October when everything came apart. Isabella had left a charity luncheon 2 hours early because she had a headache that was building behind her left eye like something trying to break through. She had taken a car home to their California estate, the one with the 8 bedrooms and the infinity pool that overlooked the canyon, and she had let herself in through the side entrance the way she always did when she came home, without Nathaniel, because the front door required the security code, and Nathaniel kept changing it and never thought to tell her. She heard voices in the sitting room. She recognized both of them. Nathaniel's voice she knew better than her own heartbeat low, assured the kind of voice that filled a room without raising self. And the other voice, the one that made Isabella's feet stop moving before her mind fully understood why, was Celeste Warren's higher smother, the kind of voice that practiced itself in mirrors. Isabella stood in the hallway for a moment. She was not naive. She had not been naive for a long time. But there is a difference between suspecting a thing and walking into the room where that thing is sitting in the light, fully formed and no longer hiding. She had suspected for months. She had told herself she was imagining it. She had told herself that Nathaniel's long nights and his new habit of leaving rooms when his phone rang and his sudden interest in the gym at 10 in the evening were just the natural rhythms of a busy man, a powerful man, a man under enormous pressure. She walked into the sitting room. Nathaniel and Celeste were not doing anything dramatic. They were sitting close together on the cream sofa, Nathaniel's hand covering Celeste's, and the expression on Nathaniel's face when he looked up and saw his wife standing in the doorway was not guilt. It was irritation. "Isabella." He said her name the way you say the name of a dog who has wandered into a room where it was not supposed to be. "I didn't hear the car. I came in through the side," she said. Her voice was steady. She did not know how her voice was so steady. Some part of her brain was still processing the scene, still cross-referencing it against every excuse she had made. Every night she had told herself she was wrong. Every morning she had looked at herself in the bathroom mirror and convinced herself that the distance between them was temporary, that marriage went through seasons, that patience was a form of love. And then she saw it. It was the necklace. Celeste Warren was wearing Isabella's mother's pearl necklace, the one with the small gold clasp in the shape of a flower. The one that Isabella's mother had pressed into her hands the morning of her wedding and said, "This is for the moments when you need to remember who you are." The one that Isabella kept in a velvet box in the top drawer of her nightstand and only wore on occasions that mattered to her, not to anyone else. The one that Nathaniel apparently knew exactly where to find. Something moved through Isabella's chest that she could not name. It was not quite grief, and it was not quite rage, and it was something much colder than either of those things. It was the feeling of a door closing, not being slammed, not being forced, just quietly, firmly, finally closing. "That necklace," Isabella said, "belongs to me." Celeste touched the pearls with one finger, and the look on her face was so deliberately casual that Isabella understood it was practiced. "Nathaniel gave it to me," she said, "as a gift. Nathaniel doesn't have the right to give that to anyone." Nathaniel stood up then, and his height, which had once made Isabella feel safe, now just made the room feel smaller. "We need to talk," he said, and the way he said it made clear that the talking would be done entirely by him. Isabella agreed. "We do." He told her to sit down. She did not sit down. He moved to the desk by the window, the heavy oak one that had belonged to his grandfather, and he opened the top drawer and he pulled out an envelope. He walked to the dining table and he slid it across the surface toward her, and the sound it made on the marble was very small for something that was about to rearrange her entire life. "This has been coming for a while," Nathaniel said. "I think you know that." Isabella looked at the envelope. "Divorce papers. It's already been reviewed by my attorney. The terms are more than fair. You'll have the apartment in Manhattan and a monthly settlement. You won't have to worry about anything." She looked up at him. "You've been planning this. I've been thinking about it," he said, and his voice had taken on the particular tone he used in negotiations, the one that was designed to make the other party feel that the decision had already been made and resistance was simply inefficient. "We've been growing apart for years, Isabella. This isn't a surprise. You gave her my mother's necklace. That's not the point. It is absolutely the point." Celeste had not moved from the sofa. She was watching the conversation the way a person watches a television show they have already seen the ending of, with mild interest and no particular concern for the characters involved. Isabella looked at her. "How long?" Celeste tilted her head. "Excuse me, how long have you been sleeping with my husband?" Nathaniel said. "Isabella, I'm asking her." Celeste met her eyes with something that was almost pity, except that pity requires some acknowledgement of the other person's pain. And what was in Celeste Warren's expression was something cleaner than that. Something that said, "You were always going to lose this." The only question was timing. "Long enough," Celeste said. Isabella absorbed that. She took a breath. She looked at the divorce papers on the table. And then she looked at Nathaniel, her husband of 8 years, the man she had believed in before anyone else did, the man she had given years of her life to building up, the man who had just said she should be grateful he kept her around this long. "You know what," she said, "Isabella, I want to say this. You've said what you needed to say. Let me say what I need to say." She kept her voice even. "You think I need these papers. You think this is you doing something to me. Like you're holding power over me right now." She paused. "You have never understood what you actually had, and you are going to spend a very long time figuring that out." Nathaniel almost smiled. "Not quite, but almost. You sound like you're planning something dramatic." "You're not going to do anything dramatic, Isabella. You're going to take the settlement. You're going to go back to wherever it is you came from. And you're going to be fine. You've always been fine. You're very good at being fine." It was, in its way, the cruelest thing he had ever said to her, because he said it like it was a compliment. Isabella reached up and removed her wedding ring. She set it on the table beside the divorce papers. She did not throw it. She did not place it in his hand. She simply set it down, the way you set down something you've been carrying for too long and have finally decided to put away. Then she walked to the hallway closet, took out the small overnight bag she kept packed for the charitable events that sometimes required overnight travel. And she walked out of the house. She did not slam the door. She did not say goodbye to Celeste Warren. She did not cry until she was in the back of the car, in the dark, and then she cried the way you cry when you have been holding it for 8 years completely, and silently, and with a kind of relief underneath the grief that surprised even her. She called Madeline Carter from the car. Madeline picked up on the second ring, the way she always had, the way she had been doing since they were roommates at 22. And Isabella had called her from a bathroom at a party saying she didn't feel well, and Matt had come in without asking any question. "Maddie," Isabella said. "I'm here," Madeline said immediately. What happened? He had divorce papers ready. He'd been planning it. And Celeste was there. Madeline said a word that was not printable in polite company. Then she said, "Where are you?" "In a car. Come to me. Right now, don't go to a hotel, don't go anywhere else. Come straight to me. I don't want to be a problem." Isabella Marie Monroe. "If you tell me you don't want to be a problem right now, I will drive to California and shake you. Get in the car and come to Boston." Isabella laughed despite herself. It was a wet, broken sound, but it was okay, she said. Okay, Madeline said. I'm making tea, and I'm putting the air mattress in the study because the guest room has my fabric samples everywhere. Don't argue with me about the mattress. I won't argue. You always argue. I'm tired, Isabella said. I'm too tired to argue tonight. The line was quiet for a moment. Then Madeline said softly, the way you say the true thing when there's no longer any point in saying the cushioned version. I know, sweetheart, I know. Isabella looked out the window at the California lights moving past her. She thought about the necklace around Celeste Warren's neck. She thought about her mother's hands pressing it into hers. She thought about a younger version of herself, 22 years old, sitting across a coffee shop table from a man named Nathaniel Whitmore, who had just started his second company and who had looked at her like she was the most interesting person in the room. She had believed him. She had believed so many things. The car moved through the dark and Isabella Monroe began, quietly and without drama, to let them go. Madeline Carter's apartment in Boston was the opposite of the Cossetate in every way that mattered. It was 3 rooms on the 4th floor of a building that had a slow elevator and a landlord named Gerald who brought his tenants zucchini from his garden every August. The walls were covered in fabric swatches and mood boards and photographs Madeline had taken herself on disposable cameras. There were too many plants and not enough shelf space, and the kitchen smelled permanently of the spiced chai Madeline made every morning and left steeping for too long. Isabella walked in at 2 in the morning, and Madeline hugged her in the doorway for a long time without saying anything. Then she pulled back and looked at her face with the particular expression Madeline used when she was cataloging damage honest, careful, not trying to minimize what she saw. Okay, she said. Tell me everything. They sat at the kitchen table until 4 in the morning. Isabella told her everything, the papers, Celeste, the necklace, what Nathaniel had said at the end, that she should be grateful. Madeline listened without interrupting, which was unusual for her, and when Isabella finished, she poured them each a second cup of tea and sat with her hands wrapped around her mug for a long moment. He had the papers ready, Madeline said finally, in the desk drawer, which means he'd been working on this for a while. While you were still there, while you were still making sure everything ran smoothly and the right wine was at the right temperature, and his guests were comfortable. Madeline's voice was quiet, but there was iron underneath it. He was planning to end your marriage while you were running his household. Yes. And then he told you to be grateful. Yes. Madeline set down her mug. Isabella, I need to ask you something, and I need you to answer me honestly. When have I ever not been honest with you? Never. That's why I'm asking. She met her eyes. What are you going to do? Isabella thought about the question. Not the way you think about a question when you're looking for the right answer to give someone, but the way you think about a question when it's the first time you've let yourself think it clearly. What are you going to do? Not what does Nathaniel expect you to do. Not what does the settlement say. What are you actually going to do? I'm going to start over, Isabella said. Madeline waited. I've been thinking about it for a long time. I had an idea. I've had it for 2 years. Actually, for a company, health technology. Something that makes actual healthcare accessible to people who can't or is. I did all the research. I wrote the business plan. I just never, she stopped, never did anything with it, Madeline said. I kept telling myself it wasn't the right time, or that I needed to think about it more. Or that Nathaniel's things needed to come first, because he was the one with the platform and the connections and, she exhaled. Or I told myself I wasn't ready. Were you ready? I think I was ready 2 years ago, Isabella said. I think I was just afraid. Madeline looked at her steadily. Are you afraid now? Isabella considered that. The overhead light in Madeline's kitchen was slightly too bright, the kind that shows you everything without mercy. She could feel the dried tracks of the tears she'd cried in the car. She could feel the specific exhaustion of grief, which is heavier than regular tiredness in a way that's hard to explain unless you felt it. She was 36 hours into the end of her marriage. She had no plan, a small overnight bag, and an idea she had been sitting on for 2 years. I'm terrified, she said honestly. Madeline nodded. Good, that's the right feeling for what you're about to do. Isabella almost smiled. You don't even know what I'm about to do. You're about to build something, Madeline said simply. And you're going to be terrified the whole time, and you're going to do it anyway. And at some point on the other side of it, you're going to realize that the terror and the doing of the thing are not separate. They happen at the same time. That's what courage actually is. She picked up her mug again. Also, I have savings and connections in the Boston medical community. And I have been waiting for 2 years for you to stop letting Nathaniel Whitmore's life take up the space where your life was supposed to be. Isabella stared at her. You knew about the idea. You told me about it once, at Christmas 3 years ago. You were on your second glass of wine and you described the whole thing, every detail for 45 minutes, and then you said, but it's probably not realistic, and changed the subject. Madeline raised an eyebrow. I remembered every word. The thing about a friend who has known you since you were 22 is that they hold the version of you that exists before the world gets its hands on you. They remember what you were like before you learned to minimize yourself. They remember what you were excited about. They remember the shape of the person you were before you made yourself small enough to fit into someone else's life. Isabella felt something loosen in her chest. Not the grief was still there, and it would be there for a long time, she knew that. But underneath it, something she had not felt in years was beginning to move. Like a window being opened in a room that had been closed too long. Okay, she said. Okay, Madeline said. I'm going to need the couch for a few weeks, air mattress in the study. I told you. The fabric sample, I'll move them. Don't push your luck, you're getting the air mattress. Isabella laughed again. This time it sounded more like herself. In the days that followed, Isabella Monroe did something that confused almost everyone who knew her. She did not call Nathaniel's attorney. She did not post anything on social media. She did not call any of the mutual friends who were. She knew already hearing whatever version of events that Nathaniel and his people were choosing to circulate. She did not cry in front of anyone except Madeline, and she only did that once on the third night when she woke up from a dream in which she was still in the California house and everything was fine. And the particular cruelty of that kind of dream was that she had to lose it all over again when she opened her eyes. What she did instead was work. She pulled out the files she had kept on her personal laptop, the one Nathaniel had never asked about because he had always assumed that anything Isabella worked on in her personal time was something decorative and small. She opened the business plan she had written 2 years ago. She read through it with the fresh eyes of someone who no longer had anything to lose, which turns out to be an excellent editing lens. It was good. It was better than good. It was something that she had built from a genuine understanding of a genuine problem. And she had done the research and run the numbers and identified the gaps and the competitors and the market and the need. And the need was real and the gap was real and the plan was sound. She sent it to Madeline. Madeline called her 40 minutes later. Isabella, this is excellent, I know. Why didn't you do this 2 years ago? We've covered this, right? Nathaniel, the word landed like a stone in still water, flat and final. Okay, I have a friend, Dr. Patricia Huang. She's on the board of 2 healthcare nonprofits, and she's been looking for a technology partner for something she's been trying to build for years. Can I introduce you? Yes, Isabella said. Absolutely yes. This week, she met Patricia Huang in a coffee shop on Commonwealth Avenue on a Tuesday morning, wearing the simplest outfit she owned, dark jeans, a blue sweater, her hair pulled back, and she walked in without a business card or a husband's last name to lend her credibility, with nothing but her laptop and a very good plan, and the particular clarity that comes from having recently lost everything you thought you needed. Patricia Huang was 62 years old, had silver hair cut short, and had the direct, assessing gaze of a person who had spent decades separating real ideas from performed ones. She shook Isabella's hand. She sat down. She said, Madeline tells me you have something worth hearing. Convince me. Isabella opened her laptop. She talked for 45 minutes without notes. When she finished, Patricia Huang was quiet for a moment. Then she said, How soon can you start? Isabella blinked. I'm sorry, not for me. I'm not your investor. I don't have that kind of capital. But I know people who are looking for exactly this kind of project. People who fund early-stage healthcare innovation. How soon can you have a proper deck together? 2 weeks, Isabella said. Patricia raised an eyebrow. 1 week, 10 days, Isabella said. Patricia almost smiled. Fine, 10 days. I'll set up the meeting. Isabella walked back to Madeline's apartment in the October cold, and she did not call anyone to tell them how the meeting had gone. And she did not post anything anywhere, and she did not think about Nathaniel. Or she tried not to. The truth is that grief does not follow a schedule. It does not agree to stay in the designated hours you have assigned it. It shows up at inconvenient times in the shower, on the way to the coffee shop, at 3 in the morning when the air mattress makes a small sound as you shift your weight. It shows up in the specific memory of a Thursday evening 2 weeks ago, when you came home through the side door with a headache and walked into a room and saw your life from the outside for the first time and understood exactly what it had been. Isabella Monroe was building something new. She was also, at the same time, grieving something old. Both of those things were true. The mistake people make about strength is that they think it means the absence of pain. It does not mean that. It means that the pain and the work happen at the same time, and you do the work anyway, and sometimes the work is the only thing that keeps you from drowning in the pain, and sometimes that is exactly enough. Meanwhile, in California, Nathaniel Whitmore was waiting. He had given it a week. He was sure a week was more than enough time for Isabella to settle wherever she had settled, to look at her options, to run the numbers, and to understand what she had walked away from. She was sensible. She had always been sensible. That was one of the things he had valued about her. In the early years, her practicality, her ability to see situations clearly without the emotional fog that clouded other people's judgment. She would call his attorney, she would negotiate, she might even call him. He did not expect her to come back, he was past that. He had decided. Celeste was dynamic and ambitious, and she understood his world in a way that Isabella increasingly had not, and the future he was building would be better with Celeste in it. He was clear about that, but Isabella would call. She didn't call. 10 days passed, then 2 weeks, then a month. The attorney reached out to Isabella's contact information and received a response from a Boston number, brief and businesslike, that she was in the process of retaining her own representation and would be in touch. The attorney reported this to Nathaniel. Nathaniel nodded like it was of mild interest. He went back to his day, but he kept thinking about it. He kept thinking about the way she had looked in the doorway of the sitting room. Not crying, not shouting, just looking with those dark eyes of hers that had always seen more than she said, taking in the scene with a kind of quiet comprehension that, in retrospect, bothered him. He had expected anger. He had expected tears, certainly. He had been braced for a scene, raised voices, recriminations, the kinds of things that made you feel, even when you were in the wrong, that you were at least the center of the story. She had taken off her ring and walked out. That was it. Nathaniel had dealt with dozens of difficult negotiations in his career. He knew what it felt like when the other side held information you didn't have. He knew the particular unsettled quality of a room in which someone else understood more about the situation than you did. Isabella walking out of that house had felt uncomfortably like that. He started asking around casually, indirectly, the way powerful people ask questions when they do not want anyone to know they are asking. A mutual friend in New York mentioned she had heard Isabella was in Boston. A former colleague of Nathaniel's who had met Isabella at a charity event the previous year mentioned, almost in passing, that he had heard she was working on something in the healthcare tech space. Healthcare tech, Nathaniel said. Something like that. I don't know the details, but apparently it's generating some interest. Nathaniel processed this. Isabella Monroe, he said, more to himself than to the person across from him. Your ex-wife, the colleague said, and then caught himself. I'm sorry, I meant, Nathaniel said. He picked up his glass. No, it's all right. He went home that night and stood in the sitting room where it had all happened, and he thought about what he actually knew about his wife of 8 years. What he actually knew, not what he had assumed. He thought about the conversations he had tuned out, because he had been busy or tired or distracted by something that had seemed more important. He thought about the times she had tried to tell him something, leaning forward over dinner with that particular look she had when she was excited about an idea, and he had nodded without really listening because he had already been composing his answer to an email in his head. He thought about the necklace. He thought about the look on her face when she had seen it around Celeste's neck. Not what he had expected. He had expected jealousy. He had expected wounded pride. What he had seen instead was something that looked almost like confirmation, like a person who had been wondering about something for a long time and had just been given the final piece of evidence they needed to stop wondering and start acting. She had walked out of that house like someone who had already decided. Before the ring came off, before the bag was packed, she had already decided. When had she decided? He called his assistant. I need everything that's publicly available on a company called. He stopped. He did not know the name of the company. He did not know if there was a company. He only had the word of a colleague who had heard something from someone. Sir, the assistant said. Never mind, Nathaniel said. I'll do it myself. He sat at the desk that had belonged to his grandfather and opened his laptop and typed Isabella Monroe's name into a search engine. something he had not done in the 8 years they had been married, because it had simply never occurred to him that there would be anything to find. What came back was modest, a LinkedIn profile dormant from years ago listing her degrees, and he hadn't realized, or hadn't registered, that she held a master's in biomedical engineering from Johns Hopkins. An academic paper co-authored, published in a healthcare technology journal 6 years ago, before they were married. A photograph in a charity gala program from 3 years ago, credited not as Nathaniel Whitmore's wife but by her full professional name. Nathaniel stared at the screen for a long time. He thought about the 8 years of dinners he had hosted in their California home, and the careful invisible work that had made every one of them run perfectly. He thought about the early years before the money was what it was now, when Isabella had taken work she was overqualified for so they could pay the rent while he put everything into the company. He thought about the nights he had come home late and found her asleep on the couch with her laptop open on her lap, working on something she never talked about because he never asked. He thought about Celeste Warren, who had walked into his life with the confidence of someone who understood his world, and the way he had mistaken that confidence for substance, and the way he had looked at his wife's quiet competence and mistaken it for nothing at all. He closed the laptop. He sat in the dark room for a long time. And for the first time since the night he had slid divorce papers across the marble table, like they were nothing, Nathaniel Whitmore had the uncomfortable, disorienting, entirely unfamiliar feeling that he might have made a catastrophic mistake. Not because Isabella might be building something, but because Isabella had always been building something. He simply had never looked. In Boston, Isabella did not know about any of this. She was 10 days into the most intensely focused work of her life. The air mattress had been replaced at Madeline's insistence with a proper bed frame from a furniture store 2 blocks away, and her corner of the study had evolved into a proper workspace with a second monitor borrowed from Madeline's freelance design setup and a whiteboard she had bought from a dollar store and covered in diagrams, timelines, and the names of contacts she needed to reach. She was sleeping 6 hours a night. She was eating properly because Madeline was the kind of friend who put food in front of you without asking, and you ate it or you dealt with the consequences. She was not thinking about Nathaniel, or she was trying very hard not to think about Nathaniel, which is different, but which, in the moment, felt like enough. The deck for the investor meeting was done in 9 days. She sent it to Madeline at 11:30 at night, and Madeline responded at 11:41. "This is the best thing you have ever made." Isabella read the message 3 times. Then she put her phone face down on the desk and went to sleep. And for the first time in as long as she could remember, she did not dream about the California house. She did not dream about the pearl necklace. She did not dream about a marble table and an envelope sliding across it. She dreamed about something she was building, something she could not see clearly in the dream, but that had the particular quality of things that are yours genuinely, entirely, unmistakably yours. And she woke up in the blue-gray Boston morning with that feeling still in her chest, and she lay still for a moment so she would not lose it before she was fully awake. Then she got up, she made coffee, she opened her laptop. She went to work. She was not the same woman who had walked out of a California house 23 days ago with the small overnight bag and nothing she could name yet. She was something that woman had been becoming for a long time, slowly in the quiet hours and the unseen work and the ideas she had kept to herself because no one around her had ever thought to ask. She was not Nathaniel Whitmore's wife. She was not the poor, ordinary woman he had decided was no longer suitable. She was Isabella Monroe, and she was just getting started. The morning after Isabella left, Nathaniel Whitmore woke up at 6:15 the way he always did, reached for his phone and checked his messages before his eyes were fully open. There were 43 unread emails, 2 missed calls from his attorney, and nothing from Isabella. He told himself that was fine. He told himself she needed time. He put the phone down, got up and went to the gym on the 3rd floor of the California estate, and he worked out for 45 minutes with the focused, methodical intensity of a man who uses physical effort to avoid thinking about things he does not want to think about. When he was done, he stood in the shower and let the water run hot and thought about the investor call he had at 9 and the board meeting at 2, and the dinner reservation he needed to cancel because it had been made for 2 people, and he was now apparently 1. He did not think about Isabella, or he tried not to. By day 3, he had told himself a complete story about what was happening. Isabella was staying with that friend of hers, the one in Boston with the messy apartment and the aggressive opinions. She was upset. She needed to process. The settlement his attorney had structured was generous, more than generous. It was a considerable sum, enough to give her a genuinely comfortable life without ever working a day. She would come to terms with the situation. She would call his attorney. They would work out the details, and it would be over cleanly. He preferred clean endings. He was good at them. By day 7, Celeste had moved 3 pieces of luggage into the California estate. She had also, Isabella's former housekeeper noticed, but did not comment on, rearranged the kitchen in a way that made no practical sense, moved the good china from the cabinet where Isabella had kept it for 8 years to a different shelf, and asked twice where the wine key was kept, despite it having been in the same drawer since Nathaniel bought the house. The housekeeper, a woman named Rosa who had worked for the Whitmore household for 6 years, said nothing. She moved through the house, doing her work with the careful neutrality of someone who understood that observation and silence were sometimes the same thing. On day 9, Rosa found a photograph on the floor of the master bedroom closet. It had fallen from a shelf, probably dislodged when Celeste had reorganized. It was a picture of Nathaniel and Isabella early in their marriage, taken at a cabin in Colorado the winter before the company really took off. They were both laughing at something off camera. Isabella was wearing a thick wool sweater, and her hair was loose, and she looked completely unguarded in the way that people look when they are genuinely happy and do not know anyone is watching. Rosa picked up the photograph, stood with it for a moment, and then placed it carefully on the nightstand. When she came back the next morning, it was gone. She did not ask where it had gone. She already knew. Back in Boston, Isabella had made her first investor pitch. It had not gone perfectly. The 2 investors Patricia had connected her with were a man named Douglas Park, who ran a mid-size healthcare venture fund out of Cambridge, and his partner, a woman named Stephanie Reeves, who had started and sold 2 companies before 40 and had the particular economy of manner that comes from having sat through hundreds of pitches and developed a finely tuned radar for the ones that were real and the ones that were performance. Isabella had walked in with her deck, her 9-page business plan, and the specific kind of nerves that feel like electricity, rather than fear, the kind that mean you care enormously about something, and have not yet made your peace with the possibility of failing at it. She sat across from Douglas and Stephanie in a glass-walled conference room on the 14th floor of a building on Boylston Street, and she opened by saying, "I'm not going to tell you I'm going to change the world. I'm going to show you a problem, tell you exactly how I plan to solve it, and let you decide if the numbers make sense." Stephanie had looked up from her notepad. Douglas had leaned forward slightly, and Isabella had talked for 38 minutes. She talked about the gap, the specific, measurable, inexcusable gap between what basic preventive health care actually costs to provide and what middle and lower income families actually pay for it after insurance premiums, deductibles, and the compounding inefficiencies of a system that was not designed for their needs. She talked about where technology could close that gap without requiring regulatory overhaul or political will. She talked about the 3 companies operating in adjacent spaces and exactly why each of them had failed to solve the core problem. She talked about her own research, her own methodology, the partnerships she had already begun exploring with 2 regional healthcare networks. When she finished, Douglas Park folded his hands and said, "How much are you raising?" Isabella told him. He looked at Stephanie. Stephanie looked back at him. "We'd like to see your full financials," Stephanie said. "Can you have them to us by Thursday?" It was Tuesday. "Yes," Isabella said immediately. She called Madeline from the elevator going down. "They want the financials," she said, before Madeline could speak. Madeline made a sound that was not quite a scream. "That's Isabella. That's good. That's a very good sign." "I know. Are you panicking?" "A little. Are you going to let the panic win?" "Absolutely not." "Good." She could hear Madeline already moving, probably crossing her apartment to the desk in the corner, where she kept her own financial files. "Come home. We're going to build the best set of financials Douglas Park has ever seen in his extremely comfortable life." Isabella laughed, a real one, the kind that surprised her. "I'll be there in 20 minutes. She worked through the night. Madeline stayed up until 2 making coffee and asking sharp questions that forced Isabella to tighten every number, justify every projection, and eliminate every assumption she had not fully earned. By 4 in the morning, they had something that was not just accurate but rigorous, and Madeline had fallen asleep at the kitchen table with her face resting on her arm, and Isabella sat alone in the blue-dark quiet of the apartment and looked at what she had built. It was real. That was what hit her, sitting there at 4 in the morning. It was real, not an idea, not a plan she kept in a drawer. something actual and solid that she was about to send to people with real capital who were taking it seriously. Something that had her name on it, her name, not a last name she had borrowed, not a credential that came from standing next to someone else's success. Her name. She pressed send at 4:17. Then she put her head down on the table next to Madeline and slept for 3 hours. And when she woke up, her neck hurt, and Madeline had somehow draped a blanket over both of them without waking her. And there was already a response in her inbox from Stephanie Reeves that said simply, "Impressive, let's talk Friday." She stared at that email for a very long time. Then she went to make coffee, moving quietly around Madeline's kitchen, and she thought about what it felt like to have built something that stood on its own, without anyone's permission, without anyone's name attached but hers. It felt like nothing she had words for yet. It felt like a country she had only heard described, finally seen from the inside. She was still thinking about it when her phone rang. The number was not saved, but the area code was California. She considered not answering. She answered, "Mrs. Whitmore." It was Nathaniel's attorney, a man named Gerald Fitch, whose voice had the particular measured smoothness of a person who was paid to deliver uncomfortable information, without appearing to be the source of the discomfort. "I was hoping to reach you. We haven't been able to connect with your representation." "I've been busy," Isabella said. "Of course, I understand." A pause, carefully calibrated. "I wanted to discuss the timeline on the paperwork. Mr. Whitmore is hoping to finalize things in a timely fashion. The settlement terms are, as I'm sure you've reviewed." "Gerald," Isabella said, "I'll have my attorney reach out, of course, but if you have any questions about the terms, I'm more than happy to—" "I don't have questions," she said. "I have a meeting on Friday. Have a good morning." She hung up. She looked at the phone for a moment. Then she put it face down on the counter and went back to her coffee, and she thought, without particular bitterness, that there had been a time in her life when a call from Gerald Fitch would have sent her straight to the floor, would have made her feel like the world was happening to her rather than around her. And that time was over. That version of herself had walked out of a California house 31 days ago and left her wedding ring on a marble table. And what had grown in the space where that version used to be was still new and still tender, but it was entirely, unmistakably hers. Her phone's a text from an unknown number. She opened it. It was a photograph of herself and Nathaniel in Colorado the first winter of their marriage. She recognized it immediately. She had kept it on the nightstand and then packed it away when things started to shift between them, and she had not been able to look at it without feeling something complicated. She did not know how it had gotten to whoever had sent it. She did not know who had sent it, though she had a reasonable idea. She typed back, "Rosa, thank you." 3 dots appeared. "Then he doesn't see it, but I do. Take care of yourself, Mrs. Monroe." She noticed, with a quiet, precise greeting, that Rosa had called her Monroe. She put the phone down. She drank her coffee. She did not cry. She was past crying about Nathaniel Whitmore. The grief was still there. She was not pretending it wasn't. She was not the kind of person who pretended, but grief is not a static thing. It moves, it changes texture. In the first week it had been sharp and immediate, the kind that takes your breath. Now 31 days out, it had become something slower and more diffuse, a low-frequency hum underneath everything. The way a building near a highway hums with the vibration of traffic even when all the windows are closed. She could live with a hum. She was learning to build through it. The Friday meeting with Stephanie Reeves lasted 2 hours and 40 minutes, which Madeline told her afterward was a very good sign, because venture investors who were not interested did not give you hours and 40 minutes of their Friday. Stephanie had asked hard questions about the regulatory pathway and the liability structure and the specific mechanics of how the technology would interface with existing provider networks. She had pushed on the unit economics in a way that required Isabella to defend every number, and Isabella had defended every one of them, not with bluster but with data. The way you defend a thing you actually built and actually understand. At the end, Stephanie had leaned back in her chair and looked at Isabella with that direct, assessing gaze and said, "I've been doing this for 19 years. I can tell the difference between someone who built a thing and someone who hired someone to build a thing and then learned to talk about it." "You built this." "I did," Isabella said. "Why now? Why not 2 years ago when you had the idea? And don't give me the market timing answer. I want the real one." Isabella was quiet for a moment. She had known the question was coming, some version of it. She had thought about what to say. She had prepared a professional answer about strategic timing and resource readinesses. She looked at Stephanie Reeves, 19 years in the business. The kind of person who had heard every professional answer and knew immediately when she was hearing one. My marriage ended, Isabella said simply, and when it ended, I realized I had been using someone else's life as a reason not to build mine. So I stopped. Stephanie nodded slowly. Nothing in her expression changed, but something shifted slightly, the way light shifts when a cloud moves. That's the right answer, she said. I'll be in touch by end of next week. Isabella left that building walking 3 inches taller than when she had walked in. She did not call anyone. She walked 6 blocks in the October cold with her coat open despite the temperature, just breathing, just being in the outside air, just letting the city be loud around her, because the sound of it felt right for what she was feeling. She thought about 22-year-old Isabella, who had believed that standing behind someone great was this is doing something great yourself. She thought about what she would say to that version of herself if she could. She thought she would say, your instincts were right. Your ideas were real, you just gave your time to the wrong person. Then she thought, no, not entirely, because the wrong person had also, in a way, given her something. He had given her 8 years of learning exactly what it cost to abandon yourself for someone else. And that education, brutal as it was, had clarified something in her that she could not have clarified any other way. She knew now with a certainty that was not arrogance but simply knowledge. What she was worth. She knew it the way you know the weight of something you have carried for a long time and then set down. Not because someone told you, because you felt it in your own hands. She buttoned her coat and kept walking. In California, Nathaniel was finally starting to look. It had started with the LinkedIn profile, the degrees he had not thought to think about because the person who held them had been standing in his kitchen, making sure his guests had the right cheese. It had expanded from their careful, almost furtive, the searching of a man who did not want to admit, even to himself, that he was searching. He found the academic paper. He found a conference program from 7 years ago that listed Isabella as a presenter. He found a recommendation letter posted publicly as a portfolio piece by the professor who had written it that described Isabella Monroe as one of the most analytically gifted students I have encountered in 23 years of graduate teaching, with an instinctive grasp of systems design that most students require years to develop. He read that sentence 4 times. He then spent 2 hours going through old photographs on his phone, the ones he had taken himself, not the professional ones from events, and looking at them differently than he had the first time. There was one from a dinner party 3 years ago. His colleagues and their wives gathered around the long table in the California house, and Nathaniel was at the head of the table talking, expansive and loud, and Isabella was 3 seats down, leaning toward a woman he vaguely recalled was the wife of someone from the healthcare division of his portfolio, and they were deep in a conversation that no one else at the table was part of, and Isabella's expression was the one she had when she was genuinely engaged, alert, animated, specific. He could not remember what they had talked about. He had not asked, he had assumed it was small talk. He put the phone down and picked up a glass of water and drank it slowly, and thought about all the conversations he had not asked about. All the doors he had not opened, not out of cruelty, he told himself, out of an assumption so deep it had never surfaced into an actual thought, that Isabella's inner life was smaller than his, that her ideas were decorative where his were structural, that she was the warm and pleasant background of his story rather than the protagonist of her own. He had been wrong. The size of how wrong he had been was only now becoming clear to him, and it was becoming clear the way very large things become clear slowly, and with a kind of vertigo, as though the ground has shifted slightly, and you are not entirely sure of your footing. "You're quiet tonight," Celeste said. She was on the cream sofa with a glass of wine, her phone in her hand. She had a very clean sense of her own value and an easy, uncomplicated way of moving through the world that Nathaniel had found exciting 3 months ago. He looked at her and tried to find what had excited him. Tired, he said. Long day, long few days. She accepted that and went back to her phone, and he sat in the chair across from her and thought about a woman who was in Boston working on something she had been quietly building in her own head for 2 years, while his parties ran smoothly and his guests ate the right cheese. "Celeste," he said. She looked up. "The pearl necklace. The one I gave you the night a few weeks ago. Do you still have it?" Something moved in her expression. Yes. "Can you get it?" A pause. "Nathaniel." "Why?" "It belonged to her mother," he said. "It shouldn't have been given away." "I'd like to return it." The pause was longer this time. "It was a gift. It was a mistake," he said, and his voice was quiet but entirely clear in the way it was when he was not in the mood to negotiate. I should not have given it to you. I'd like it back." Celeste looked at him for a long moment with eyes that were suddenly much more calculating than warm. "Fine," she said. And she got up, and something in the way she got up told Nathaniel that the conversation they were going to have about this was not the conversation they were having right now. It was coming later when she had arranged her thoughts. She came back with the necklace and set it in his hand. He closed his fingers around the pearls and sat with them in his palm. He thought about Isabella's face when she had seen it around Celeste's neck. The thing he had mistaken for jealousy and now understood was something else entirely, the specific look of a person who has just been shown something they already knew but had been trying not to know, and the knowledge had arrived not with shock but with a grief so quiet it barely moved the surface. He thought she had already decided before she walked in that door. He thought she had known before I did. He held the necklace and said nothing, and across the room Celeste watched him with the careful attention of a person recalculating. In Boston 2 weeks later, Stephanie Reeves called. Isabella was at Madeline's kitchen table when her phone rang, and she saw the number and she stood up without fully meaning to. The way your body reacts to things before your mind has finished processing them. "Isabella," Stephanie said, "we'd like to move forward. We're prepared to lead the seed round. I'm sending you the term sheet this afternoon." The kitchen was very quiet. Madeline was standing in the doorway from the hall, having heard Isabella stand up, and she was watching her face with the intensity of someone reading a book at the most important page. "Thank you," Isabella said. Her voice was steady. She did not know how her voice was so steady. "I'll review it with my attorney and be back to you within the week." "Take your time," Stephanie said. And then before she hung up, she added, "You built something real." "Isabella, I don't say that to everyone." The call ended. Isabella put the phone down on the table very carefully. Madeline said, "Well?" Isabella looked at her. "They're leading the round." Madeline's hands went to her mouth. Then she crossed the kitchen in 4 steps and pulled Isabella into a hug so sudden and fierce that Isabella almost lost her balance. And they stood there in the kitchen, arms around each other, and Isabella felt her eyes burn but did not let herself cry, because if she started she was not sure she would stop, and there was too much still to do. "Your mother would be absolutely beside herself right now," Madeline said into her shoulder. That did it. One tear, just one. Isabella pressed it away with the back of her hand before Madeline could see it. "Don't," she said. "I have a term sheet to read." Madeline laughed and pulled back, and her own eyes were bright. "You impossible, wonderful woman," she said. "Go read your term sheet." Isabella sat back down at the kitchen table, opened her laptop and waited for the email. While she waited, she thought about her mother. She thought about a kitchen not unlike this one, in a small house in Ohio, and her mother pressing the pearl necklace into her hands the morning of the wedding and saying, "This is for the moments when you need to remember who you are." She thought that she had understood that instruction incorrectly for a long time. She had thought it meant, "Wear this so you remember you are loved." But she understood it now, sitting at a kitchen table in Boston with a seed round on the way, to mean something different. It meant when the world tries to tell you who you are, hold this and remember that you already know. She knew. She had always known. She had simply been talked out of it for 8 years by a man who confused his own magnitude with the only possible magnitude. And she had let him because she had loved him, and because love, when it is not paired with a clear understanding of your own value, can be a very expensive thing. The email arrived. She opened it. The number in the term sheet was larger than she had asked for. Not dramatically, so Stephanie was precise, not reckless but larger. Deliberately larger, a statement. Isabella read it 3 times to make sure she was reading it correctly. Then she called her attorney, a woman named Claire, who had been recommended by Patricia Huang, and who had the particular focused energy of someone who genuinely loved her work, and she read the term sheet aloud over the phone while Claire asked sharp, specific questions that Isabella had answers for because she had done the work, because she had always done the work. "This is a strong offer," Claire said when they were done. "We'll want to negotiate one clause on the governance structure, but the economics are very fair. You did well, I did the work," Isabella said. "Yes," Claire said, "you did." That night Madeline ordered food from the Thai place 3 blocks away, and they sat on the floor of the living room because the table still had the financials spread across it. And they ate and talked and didn't talk, the easy alternation of 2 people who have known each other long enough to be comfortable in the silences. Madeline told her about a commission she had just landed, a series of custom textile installations for a hotel in Providence. Isabella told her about the governance clause Claire was going to push back on. They talked about small things, a movie they both wanted to see, a book Madeline had been meaning to recommend. The zucchini Gerald the landlord had left by the door again despite it being October, and zucchini season being definitively over. At some point Madeline said, "How are you actually doing?" "Not the company." Isabella was quiet for a moment. "I miss him," she said. "I know I'm not supposed to say that." "I know it makes me sound human," Madeline said. "It makes you sound like someone who was married for 8 years. I miss the version of him I thought he was," Isabella said more precisely. "The one at the beginning. The one who looked at me like I was the most interesting person in the room." She looked at her food. "I think that person was real for a while. I think he just grew away from it. And instead of telling me, he let me think it was my fault. That I had become less, that I needed to fix something in myself to get back to what we were." She paused. "It took me way too long to understand that the problem was not me becoming less. The problem was him becoming someone who needed me to be less so he could feel like more." Madeline was quiet. "That's a hard thing to see clearly," she said finally. "It's a hard thing to say out loud," Isabella said. "But it's true. What happens when he figures that out?" Isabella looked at her. "What, Nathaniel?" "Unaware, yes. Selfish, absolutely, but not stupid. At some point he's going to put together what he gave up." Madeline tilted her head. "What happens then?" Isabella thought about it. She thought about the divorce papers on the marble table. She thought about his voice saying she should be grateful. She thought about the pearl necklace, her mother's pearl necklace, clasped around Celeste Warren's throat. "Then he'll know," she said. "That's it? He'll know?" "That's enough," Isabella said. "Some reckonings don't need an audience. He'll know, and he'll have to live with it, and that's its own thing." She picked up her fork. "I'm not interested in his regret. I'm interested in what I'm building." Madeline looked at her for a long moment. "You've changed," she said. "In 6 weeks I haven't changed," Isabella said. "I've stopped hiding." That was the truest thing she had said all night. She was not becoming someone new. She was returning to someone she had set aside, carefully and gradually and without fully noticing, over the course of 8 years of making herself smaller so that someone else could feel larger. She was returning to herself, and she was not doing it quietly. The term sheet was signed 3 weeks later. The press release went out the following Monday. It was a small thing, a seed-round announcement, the kind of item that appears in the business section of industry publications and gets read by people who follow healthcare technology and venture capital. It named Isabella Monroe as founder and CEO of MedReach, a healthcare technology company focused on preventive care accessibility for underserved income brackets. It did not mention Nathaniel Whitmore, not once, on the West Coast. In the California estate with the infinity pool overlooking the canyon, a phone lit up with a Google alert. Nathaniel Whitmore read the press release once. Then he read it again. Then he put his phone face down on the desk that had belonged to his grandfather and sat very still for a long time. And the thing that moved through him was not quite surprise. Because some part of him had been preparing for this, had known it was coming since the night he sat in the dark room after searching her name and understood what he had never bothered to look for. What moved through him was something harder to name. Something that felt, in its specific weight and texture, exactly like the thing he had told himself he would never feel. Loss, real loss, not the procedural loss of ending a marriage. Not the logistical loss of adjusting a household. The loss of understanding, fully and without cushion, what had been in the room with you all along. What had been standing at your dinner table and sleeping in your bed and working quietly in the corner of a room you never walked into, and understanding it only now that it was gone. He read the press release a third time. Isabella Monroe, founder and CEO. He put the phone down. He looked at the pearl necklace sitting in the small dish on his desk where he had placed it the night he had asked for it back. He had been meaning to send it to her. He had written the note 3 times and thrown it away 3 times because nothing he wrote sounded like what he meant. And he was beginning to understand that this was because what he meant was not something that translated cleanly into a note. What he meant was, "I didn't see you." What he meant was, "I looked at you every day and I didn't see you." What he meant was, "I think I have spent 8 years standing next to something extraordinary and calling it ordinary because it was easier than acknowledging what it meant. What it said about me that someone like you chose someone like me." He looked at the necklace. He looked at the press release on his phone. And for the first time since the night Isabella Monroe had walked out of his house without slamming the door, Nathaniel Whitmore did not try to negotiate with what he was feeling. He did not reframe it or minimize it or file it under something more manageable. He sat with it, all of it, the weight of it, and somewhere in Boston, in an office that still smelled like fresh paint, in a building with a slow elevator and a landlord named Gerald, Isabella Monroe was on a call with her first 3 vendor partners, walking them through the implementation plan for a platform that had lived in her head for 2 years and was now, finally, undeniably real. She was not thinking about California. She was not thinking about marble tables or divorce papers or the specific cruelty of a man who had measured her worth by his own willingness to see her. She was thinking about the work. She was thinking about what she was building. She was thinking about how it felt to be, for the first time in 8 years, entirely and unambiguously herself, and that feeling, that particular, hard-won, finally arrived feeling, was worth every single thing it had cost her to get here. 3 months after Isabella Monroe walked out of the California estate without slamming the door, Nathaniel Whitmore did something he had not done in years. He sat alone at the dining room table and ate breakfast in complete silence. No phone calls, no emails pulled up on his laptop. No Celeste across from him talking about the charity gala she wanted to attend, or the restaurant she had heard about, or the vacation she thought they should take to reset. Just Nathaniel, a cup of coffee he had made himself because Rosa had the morning off, and the particular quality of silence that a very large house produces when you are the only person in it, and you have recently begun to understand that the silence was always there, underneath all the noise you had filled it with. He had asked Celeste to go back to her own apartment 4 days ago. The conversation had not been clean. Celeste was not a woman who accepted redirection gracefully, and she had made her feelings known in the specific way of someone who had calculated her own position in a situation, and was unwilling to surrender it without documentation. She had said things that were designed to wound, and some of them had landed. She had accused him of using her. She had told him that Isabella had clearly done a number on him even from a distance. She had said, with a precision that was almost impressive, that he was the kind of man who only understood the value of something after it was gone, which made him, in her professional opinion, both an excellent investor and a deeply mediocre human being. She had taken her 3 pieces of luggage. She had left the cream sofa, which she had said she was planning to replace anyway. She had not taken the pearl necklace, which was still in the small dish on his desk, because Nathaniel had already moved it there before the conversation began, and Celeste had looked at it once and understood something from its placement that told her the argument was already over before it started. After she left, Nathaniel had stood in the house for a long time, not doing anything, just standing, taking inventory of a life that had been running on a logic he was no longer certain was sound. He thought about Douglas Park. 3 weeks ago, through the normal channels of the investment community, the lunches and conferences and overlapping board memberships that kept a certain tier of business people in constant loose contact, Nathaniel had heard Douglas Park mention the name MedReach in conversation. He had mentioned it the way you mention something you believe in, with a specific energy that investors reserved for the deals they were genuinely excited about, rather than the ones they were simply competent about. Nathaniel had said casually, MedReach, that's the healthcare access startup? Douglas had looked at him. You know it, I've heard the name. Douglas had nodded, and the nod had the particular quality of someone deciding whether to say the next thing. He said it. Remarkable founder, Isabella Monroe. She came in with a pitch that was honestly, in 19 years of doing this, I can count on one hand the founders who walked in already knowing exactly what they were doing. She's one of them. Nathaniel had kept his expression neutral the way he had learned to keep it neutral in rooms where he did not want anyone to know what he was thinking. Is that right, he said, the clarity of her model, the research depth. And she's not performing it, you know? Some founders perform their competence for you, she just has it. Didn't need to convince anyone of anything, just laid out the reality and let the numbers do it. Douglas had shaken his head with the slight wonder of a man who had been in the business long to be genuinely surprised by it. You know her. We've met, Nathaniel said, and he had moved the conversation forward before Douglas could ask anything else. He had driven home that evening holding those words. Remarkable founder, she just has it. He had known, in the abstract, since reading the press release, that Isabella had done something real. But hearing it in Douglas Park's voice, Douglas, who had funded 11 companies to successful exits and had the precise and unromantic judgment of a man who dealt in evidence, rather than feeling, had given it a weight that the press release alone had not. Because a press release was a document. Isabella's name on a term sheet was a transaction. But Douglas Park saying remarkable founder in that specific tone, unprompted in a context where there was nothing to gain from the compliment, was something else. That was truth, the kind you could not argue with. Nathaniel sat at the dining room table with his coffee and the silence of the house and thought about a morning 5 years ago when he had come downstairs and found Isabella at this same table, her laptop open, leaning forward with that particular focused expression she had, and he had poured his coffee and said, without looking at her, "What are you working on?" And she had started to explain something about healthcare systems, about access gaps, about a problem she had been thinking about, and he had nodded while looking at his phone and said in the way that was not listening. And she had paused mid-sentence and then said quietly, "Never mind, it's not important," and closed the laptop. He had not noticed the closing. He had not noticed the pause. He had taken his coffee and gone to make his calls. He thought about that moment now with a clarity that was almost surgical, the way time sometimes sharpens a memory that you had previously filed without processing. She had started to tell him. She had been right there, at this table, trying to tell him, and he had been so certain that whatever she had to say was smaller than whatever he was about to do that he had not even been present enough to register the closing of the laptop. He put down his coffee cup. He picked up his phone. He called his attorney, Gerald, the divorce papers. "Where are we?" Gerald's voice was careful. "Mrs. Monroe's attorney has been in contact. They've flagged one clause for negotiation, the intellectual property provision in Section 4. Her attorney is suggesting it's overly broad." "Drop it," Nathaniel said. A pause. "The provision entirely?" "The provision entirely. Give her the clean version. Whatever she wants on the IP, give it to her." "Nathaniel, that clause protects. I know what it protects." "Drop it," he paused, and Gerald, the Manhattan apartment, put it in her name, not as part of the settlement. As a gift separately. No conditions. Gerald was quiet for long enough that Nathaniel could almost hear him recalibrating. "That's Nathaniel. That's a significant asset." "It was always hers," Nathaniel said. "She picked it out. She furnished it. She knew every neighbor in the building by name. It was always hers. I just didn't think to say so." He stopped. "Make it right. That's the job." He hung up. He sat with the phone in his hand. He thought about calling Isabella directly. He had thought about it more than once in the past 3 months. He had picked up the phone and put it down again more times than he would have admitted to anyone, because Nathaniel Whitmore was a man who was very comfortable initiating contact when he held the advantage, and he was only beginning to understand that he did not hold any advantage here, and probably hadn't for longer than he realized. He did not call. Not yet. He did something he had not done since the early years when the company was young and the stakes were high, and he had not yet learned to outsource, thinking about difficult things to the buffer of wealth and staff and scheduled distance. He thought. He actually sat with the problem, which was not a business problem, which was the kind of problem he had no particular training for. And he thought about it honestly. What had he built? What had he, Nathaniel Whitmore, actually constructed in the 8 years of his marriage, beyond the financial infrastructure and the social calendar, and the California estate that looked extraordinarily well curated from the outside? He had built a performance. He had built the performance of a successful man, and he had cast Isabella in a supporting role, and he had never once asked her if that was the role she wanted, because he had assumed that proximity to his performance was itself a form of starring. The shame of that realization was quieter and more persistent than he had expected shame to feel. He had expected it to be dramatic, the kind of revelation that arrived with noise and urgency. Instead, it arrived the way dawn arrives, gradually, then all at once, and by the time you noticed it, it had already been happening for a while. He was still sitting at the table when his phone rang. He looked at the screen. The call was from his older sister, Diane, who lived in Connecticut and called him 4 times a year with a reliable schedule of times, someone who maintained family relationships out of genuine love, but also respected the fact that he was busy. It was not one of the 4 scheduled times, he answered. "I saw the press release," Diane said without preamble. "Hello to you too." "Don't hello me, Nathaniel. I saw the press release about Isabella's company. I saw it 3 weeks ago, and I have been sitting on calling you for 3 weeks because I needed to decide what I actually wanted to say." A pause. "Have you talked to her?" "Not directly. Have you tried?" "I'm working on it." Diane made a sound that was specific to older sisters. The particular frequency of a person who has known you since before you knew yourself and retains that information as a permanent reference point. "Do you understand what you had?" "I'm beginning to." Beginning to. She repeated it the way you repeat something when the words themselves are the problem. Nathaniel, I sat across from that woman at your dining room table for 8 years. I watched her manage your home and your guests and your ego with a grace that I, frankly, found exhausting to witness because I kept thinking, doesn't anyone see what she's doing? Doesn't anyone understand what this costs? Hers was steady, but there was something underneath it that was not quite anger. It was older than anger, and I never said anything. That's on me. I told myself it wasn't my place. But I am saying it now because it is apparently the only time it's going to do any good. You had a remarkable woman and you let her disappear into your life, and when she stopped disappearing, you handed her divorce papers. Nathaniel was quiet. I know, he said, do you? Because I know is what people say when they want the conversation to stop feeling uncomfortable. I'm asking if you actually know, if you understand the specific thing you did. I made her invisible, he said. I made her invisible, and then I was surprised when she became someone I didn't recognize. Diane was quiet for a moment. When she spoke again, her voice had shifted, softer. She didn't become someone you didn't recognize. She became someone you never bothered to know. He absorbed that. What'd I do? He asked. It was possibly the most honest question Nathaniel Whitmore had asked anyone in a decade. Not strategically honest, not honestly deployed as a negotiating tool, just genuinely. He did not know what to do. He was 40 years old and he had built a significant fortune and navigated complex deals and managed significant risk. And he did not know what to do about the fact that he had spent 8 years failing to see a person who had been standing directly in front of him. You start with the necklace, Diane said. He looked at the small dish on his desk from across the room. I was going to send it. Don't send it, she said. Take it yourself, and when you do, don't go with a plan. Don't go with a speech. Don't go the way you go into a negotiation. Go like a person who understands they did something wrong and isn't there to fix it, just to say so. She might not see me. She might not, Diane agreed. But that's not the point. The point is that you go. He was quiet. Nathaniel. Her voice was gentle now, the way it was when they were children, and she was the one who knew how to find the softer approach to a difficult truth. You have spent your entire adult life being the person that things happen around. The center of the room, the one everyone arranges themselves toward, a pause. Go be someone's peripheral for once. Show up without an agenda. Let it be about her. The call ended. He sat with his phone. He looked at the pearl necklace. He thought about a woman in Boston who was building something real with her own hands, who had been building it in her own mind for years before she got the chance to build it in the world, and who had spent 8 years standing next to a man who called her his wife in rooms full of people and never once introduced her as anything more specific than that. He made a decision. He booked a flight to Boston for the following Thursday. He did not call ahead. He understood, in a way that was new to him, that calling ahead was a form of control, a way of managing the situation before you arrived in it, of prearranging the conditions so that the outcome was more predictable. And what he needed to do in Boston was the opposite of that. What he needed to do in Boston required him to outcome a room where the outcome was entirely in someone else's hands and stay there without flinching. He had never been good at that. He was going to have to be. In Boston, Isabella Monroe had no idea any of this was happening, and she was far too busy to have given it much thought, even if she had known. MedReach had been incorporated for 11 weeks. In that time, Isabella had hired 3 full-time employees, a lead engineer named Marcus, who had left a large tech company to take a chance on something he believed in, an operations lead named Priya, who had worked in hospital administration for 8 years and understood the system from the inside, and a communications director named Tom, who was 26 years old and had a gift for translating complex healthcare policy into language that actual human beings could understand and care about. They worked out of a rented office space in Cambridge that had exposed brick and windows that let in good light and a whiteboard wall that Isabella had covered almost entirely within the first 2 weeks. Every morning she was there before anyone else, and most evenings she was still there when Marcus locked up. And in the hours between, she moved with the particular focused energy of someone who had waited a long time to do exactly this, and was not interested in wasting a single day of it, now that she could. Madeline had dinner with her every Tuesday, a standing commitment they had made in the second month, because they had both learned from experience that without a standing commitment, Isabella would cancel to work, and without cancellation prevention, she would eventually stop leaving the office at a human hour. On the Tuesday of the 11th week, Madeline arrived at the restaurant first, and was already on her second glass of water when Isabella came through the door And Madeline looked at her face and said, before Isabella had even sat down, "What happened?" Isabella sat down. "How do you do that? You have a face." "Talk," the Providence Healthcare Network called today. Isabella put her bag down and looked at Madeline. "They want to pilot the platform with 4 of their clinics. Real patients, real data. Starting in January." Madeline stared at her. "Isabella, I know, that's not a pilot. That's a proof of concept. That's the thing you needed to take this to the next round." "I know. January is 2 months away. I know." Isabella picked up the menu she had already memorized from the 12 previous Tuesday dinners and looked at it without seeing it. "I'm terrified." "Good," Madeline said immediately. "That's the right feeling." Isabella looked up and laughed despite herself. "You always say that because it's always true." Madeline set down her own menu. "The terror means it's real. If it didn't scare you, it wouldn't be worth doing." "How's the team?" "Taking it." Marcus cried a little. He tried to hide it, but he absolutely cried. Priya immediately made a project plan with 17 columns. "Tom is already drafting the press release." Isabella smiled. "They're good people. You picked them." "I did. Because you know what to look for in people." Madeline held her gaze. "You have always known what to look for in people. You just spent 8 years in a situation where that skill was being actively discouraged." Isabella looked back at her menu. It was a thing Madeline did, the pivot from celebration to the truth underneath, the gentle and consistent naming of what had happened without letting it define the moment. It was one of the things Isabella had loved about her for years, and one of the things that sometimes, in the wrong mood, made her feel the grief afresh just when she had been managing to keep it at a background hum. "Rosa called me," Isabella said. Madeline looked up. "Yesterday I didn't expect it. She just called. Said she'd given notice, said she couldn't stay in the house anymore and wanted me to know she was all right." "Did she say why she left?" "She said it didn't feel like the same house." Isabella put the menu down. She said, and I'm quoting here, "Mrs. Monroe, that woman reorganized the kitchen and threw away the basil plant you kept on the windowsill, and I decided that was enough." Madeline pressed her lips together. "The basil plant. Apparently Celeste said it was untidy." "Of course she did. Rosa brought me a cutting of it," Isabella said. "She mailed it. She mailed me a basil cutting from my own kitchen in a little plastic container wrapped in damp paper towel with a note that said, 'I thought you might want to keep growing this.'" Madeline's expression shifted into something that was trying very hard not to cry. "Rosa is a national treasure," she said. "She is." Isabella looked at her hands. "It's the little things, isn't it? Not the house, not the money. It's the basil plant on the windowsill that you kept because you liked having fresh herbs and no one ever commented on it one way or the other. And it was just a small ordinary thing that was yours. And then it's gone and you realize all over again exactly what kind of space you used to occupy." Madeline was quiet. "How are you really?" she said. "I'm good," Isabella said. And she meant it, not the defensive version of good, not the performing stability version, actually good. "I'm building something I believe in. I have people around me who are competent and real. I wake up every morning and I know exactly what I'm working toward and why it matters." She paused. "I also sometimes eat dinner at 10:30 at night because I lose track of time in the office and that's probably not sustainable." "But I'm good. You're more than good," Madeline said. "You just can't see it clearly yet because you're standing inside it." Their food arrived. They ate. They talked about the pilot and Marcus's project timeline, and whether Priya's 17-column project plan was practical or aspirational. And Madeline told her about the Providence Hotel installation and how the client kept changing the color palette, and whether changing the color palette constituted a billable revision or a free revision, which was a philosophical as much as a financial question. Isabella walked home through the Boston cold feeling, for the first time in a long time, that her life fit her. Not perfectly. Not without loss or complication or the occasional 4 a.m. moment of doubt that sent her to the kitchen for water and found her standing at the window, looking at the street below and wondering what a different version of the past 8 years might have looked like. But it fit. The way something fits when it is made for you rather than when you have remade yourself to fit it. She did not know that Thursday was coming. She did not know that a man in California had looked at a pearl necklace in a small dish on a desk and made a decision. She went to sleep that night, thinking about the Providence pilot in the January timeline, and whether Marcus had the bandwidth to manage both the technical build and the provider onboarding, or whether they needed to hire someone specifically for implementation. She slept well. She was, in a very specific and hard-won way, at peace. The peace was not the same as happiness. It was quieter than happiness, more structural, more like the feeling of a foundation than the feeling of a view. But it was real, and it was hers, and she had built it out of the wreckage of the last 8 years with her own hands, and nothing about it required anyone's permission. Thursday arrived gray and cold, the kind of late November day in Boston that feels like a warning about what December is preparing to do. Isabella was in the office by 7:30. By 9, she was in the middle of a call with one of the Providence Clinic directors, walking through the technical requirements for the January integration, when Priya appeared at her office door and held up a piece of paper on which she had written, in large letters, "Someone is here for you." Isabella held up one finger without breaking eye contact with the phone. Priya wrote under the first line, "He says his name is Nathaniel." Isabella stopped talking mid-sentence. The clinic director on the other end said, "Isabella, you still there?" "Sorry," she said. Her voice was completely steady. "Something just came up on my end. Can we pick this up at 2? I'll send the technical specs before then." "Sure thing." "Talk at 2. She hung up. She looked at Priya, who was watching her with the careful, respectful attention of someone who had realized that something significant was happening and had decided to let Isabella lead. "Where is he?" Isabella said. "Reception. He didn't have an appointment." "He said he knew that. He said he'd wait." Isabella sat for a moment. She thought about everything Diane had said to Nathaniel, which she did not know. She thought about everything Douglas Park had said about her, which she did not know either. She thought only about what she did know, that a man had flown from California to Boston without calling ahead, that he was sitting in her reception area without an appointment, and that he had said he would wait. Nathaniel Whitmore had never waited for anyone in the 8 years she had known him. "Tell him I'll be out in 10 minutes, she said. Priya nodded and disappeared. Isabella stood up. She went to the small mirror on the back of her office door, not because she was vain, but because she wanted to see herself before she walked out there. She wanted to look at the person she was right now, in this office, in this city, in this life she had built, before she walked into a room with the person who had told her she had nothing without him. She looked. She did not look like someone who had nothing. She looked like someone who had been working since 7:30 and had a 2 o'clock call and a Providence pilot to prepare for, and 3 employees who were counting on her, and a company that was, week by week, becoming exactly what she had envisioned. She looked like herself. She straightened her jacket. She walked out. Nathaniel was sitting in one of the chairs in the small reception area, and he stood up when she came through the door, and the first thing she noticed was that he looked different. Not older, exactly. More worn, maybe. The particular wearing down of a man who had recently stopped being comfortable inside his own certainty. He was holding something, the pearl necklace. He looked at her, and she looked at him, and for a moment neither of them said anything, and the silence between them had a texture to it that she could not have named, but that felt, in some complicated and unresolved way, like every conversation they had ever not had. "Isabella," he said, "Nathaniel, I know I don't have an appointment. I know you didn't ask me to come." He held out the necklace. "This belongs to you. I should never have let it leave your hands. He stopped. "I should never have done a lot of things. But this is the one I can actually fix right now." He looked at her with an expression that she recognized, after a moment, as something she had not seen on his face in years. The look of a man who was not performing. "I'm not here to make you take me back. I know that's not. I understand what I did and what it cost, and I'm not here to ask you to erase it." He swallowed. "I'm here because you deserve to hear this in person. I was wrong, not just about the end, about all of it. About the way I looked at you. About what I thought you were and what I failed to see that you actually are." His voice dropped slightly. "You are extraordinary. You were extraordinary the whole time. I just wasn't paying attention." The office was very quiet. Somewhere in the back, she could hear Marcus typing. Isabella looked at Nathaniel Whitmore standing in her reception area with her mother's pearl necklace in his outstretched hand, and she felt the complicated things she had known. She would feel because she was human, because 8 years was 8 years, and because grief is not a clean process, and love, even love that has been broken and proved insufficient, does not simply evaporate because the reasons to feel it are gone. She felt it. She let herself feel it, and then she reached out and took the necklace from his hand. She held it for a moment, the gold clasp with the flower, the familiar weight of the pearls. "Sit down," she said. He blinked. "So I'm not sending you away," she said, "but I'm not having this conversation in a doorway. Sit down." She looked at Priya. "Can you get us some coffee?" Priya nodded and disappeared with the speed of someone who was absolutely going to report everything to Marcus the moment the door closed. Isabella and Nathaniel sat across from each other in the small reception area, and Isabella looked at the man she had spent 8 years loving and building and believing in, and she felt a great number of things simultaneously, the grief and the anger and the complicated tenderness of someone who understands. Both that they were wronged and that the person who wronged them was not a villain, man who had been careless with something precious, and carelessness is not malice, but it is its own kind of damage. "I'm not angry anymore," she said, and it was true. She had been angry for weeks, a clean, useful anger that had propelled her through the early days and sharpened her thinking and given her the particular velocity of someone who has something to prove. But the anger had done its job and then receded the way the tide goes out after it has done what it came to do. "You have every right to be," he said. "I know. I'm telling you I'm not." "Not anymore." She set the necklace on the table between them. "What do you want, Nathaniel? Not what you think you owe me. Not what you think is the right thing to say. What do you actually want?" He looked at her for a long moment. "I want to know you," he said, "the version of you that was there the whole time that I didn't look at. I want to understand who you actually are." He paused. "I know that might be too late. I know I might have given that up." His voice was quiet and entirely without artifice. None of the boardroom smoothness, none of the managed tone. Just a man sitting across from a woman and telling her the truth. "But I wanted you to know that I'm asking. Whatever the answer is." Priya appeared with 2 coffees and set them down with the precision of someone who had been trained in perfect timing and disappeared again without a word. Isabella wrapped her hands around her cup. She looked at Nathaniel. She thought about Madeline saying, "Some reckonings don't need an audience." She thought about her own words, "I'm not interested in his regret. I'm interested in what I'm building." She thought about what it meant to be generous without being foolish. What it meant to be open without being naive. What it meant to be the person she had worked this hard to become, not closed, not defended, not the version of strength that required the permanent exclusion of the person who had hurt you. But not the old version either. Not the version that had stood in his kitchen, making sure the right cheese was out while he had divorce papers in his desk drawer. "You should know," she said carefully, "that I am not the same person I was in October." "I know," he said. "I don't mean that as a warning, I mean it as information. If you want to know me, the actual me, you need to understand that she doesn't live in California. She doesn't manage your household. She doesn't make herself smaller so that you can feel larger." Isabella looked at him steadily. "She runs a company. She has a pilot launching in January with a healthcare network in Providence. She has employees who count on her and investors who believe in her and a best friend who makes her eat dinner at a reasonable hour. And that is her life, and she is not giving any of it up for anyone." "I'm not asking you to give anything up," Nathaniel said. "I know you're not. I'm telling you what you're walking into. If you walk in so you understand what it actually is." He nodded slowly. "What would walking in look like?" Slowly, she said. Carefully, without any assumptions about where it ends up. She looked at him over the rim of her coffee cup. "And with the understanding that the next time you look at someone's and decide they are less than they are, I will be the first person to tell you that you are wrong." Not the last. Something moved across his face, not quite a smile. Something smaller and more real than a smile. "I believe that," he said. "Good," she said. "You should." They sat with their coffee in the small reception area of a company that Isabella Monroe had built from nothing in 11 weeks, and the conversation that followed was not dramatic. It was not the grand reconciliation scene that a certain kind of story would have written for them. It was 2 people talking haltingly, carefully, with long pauses, and the particular awkwardness of people who have a great deals of history, and are trying to figure out how much of it to bring into the room. He asked about the company, she told him, not the diplomatic version, not the version she gave investors, the real version. The one with the obstacles and the 17-column project plan, and Marcus who had cried a little, and the basil plant that Rosa had mailed her in a plastic container. He listened, he actually listened, and Isabella Monroe, who had learned to read the difference between a man who was listening and a man who was waiting for his turn to talk, noticed the difference. She did not say anything about it. But she noticed, outside the November cold pressed against the windows, and the city moved around them the way cities do, indifferent and continuous and full of its own business. Inside, 2 people sat across from each other and tried to find the language for a thing that did not have clean language yet, that was too new and too complicated and too weighted with what it had come from to move fast. Isabella picked up the pearl necklace from the table. She turned it over in her hands. She thought about her mother. She thought about the morning of the wedding and the thing her mother had meant when she'd pieced it into her palms. She thought about how long it had taken her to understand that instruction correctly, and how much it had cost her to learn it, and how certain she was now, holding the necklace in her office in a building she had chosen, in a life she had built, that she would never need anyone to remind her of it again. She knew who she was. She clasped the necklace around her own throat. She looked at Nathaniel. He looked back at her. Neither of them said anything for a moment. And in that silence was everything that had been broken, and everything that might, with enough time and enough honesty and enough willingness to be genuinely seen, be something new, not repaired, not restored, something that could only be built forward, not backward, from exactly the place they were standing right now. Isabella picked up her coffee. She had a 2:00 call. She had a January pilot to prepare for. Company to run an employee's counting on her and a best friend who would demand a full report over dinner next Tuesday. She had a life, a full, real, entirely her own life. And sitting across from a man who was, for the first time, actually trying to see it, she felt the particular, complicated, unresolved, genuinely human of someone standing at the exact intersection of everything they had lost and everything they had found. She stayed in it. She did not look away. The 2:00 call happened exactly on schedule. Isabella sat at her desk, Nathaniel gone, the pearl necklace resting against her collarbone, and she walked the Providence Clinic director through the technical integration specs, with the same focused clarity she brought to every call, every meeting, every problem that required her to be fully present and fully herself. She did not let her mind wander to the reception area where Nathaniel had sat an hour ago. She did not let herself replay the conversation, not yet. There was work to do, and the work did not pause for complicated feelings. And she had learned in the past 3 months that this was not a hardship but a gift. The work had been her anchor when everything else was moving. The one fixed point she could navigate from when the emotional weather got bad. After the call, Marcus knocked on her open office door. She looked up. His expression was the particular combination of professional restraint and barely contained curiosity that she had come to recognize as his default setting when something significant had happened, and he was trying to respect the boundary between colleague and person who wanted to know everything. "Everything okay?" he said. "Yes," she said. He nodded. Stayed in the doorway. "Marcus." "Yeah, you can ask," exhaled. "Was that actually Nathaniel Whitmore in our reception area this morning?" It was. A pause. "Do I need to be worried about anything for the company?" She looked at him steadily. "No, this company has nothing to do with Nathaniel Whitmore. Whatever he is or isn't to me personally has no bearing on what we are building here." "Is that clear, Crystal?" he said. And then, because Marcus Chen was 29 years old and had left a very comfortable job at a very large company to take a chance on something he believed in, and that kind of decision requires a person to develop an honest relationship with the things that actually matter, for what it's worth. The way you ran that Providence call just now, 45 minutes after whatever that was impressive. She almost smiled. "Thank you, Marcus. Priya has updated the project plan. It now has 19 columns." She did smile. "Of course it does." He disappeared. She turned back to her screen and opened the Providence integration document and started working. And the afternoon moved the way good working afternoons move, with momentum and purpose. The hours collapsing into each other, the problems presenting themselves and being solved or deferred to the appropriate person, the day closing with more done than had been there at the start. She did not call Madeline until she was walking home at 7. Madeline picked up immediately. He came to Boston. The pause was very short. "Nathaniel, yes. Today, this morning. He was in my reception area when I came out of a call." Madeline said the same word she had said the night Isabella had called from the car in October, the one that was not printable in polite company. Then, what did he want? He brought the necklace back. Isabella touched it through her coat. He said he was wrong, not just about the end, about all of it. He said she stopped walking for a moment, standing on the sidewalk in the dark. He said he wanted to know me, the actual me, that he hadn't looked, that he understood what he'd failed to see. Madeline was quiet. "And," she said finally, "and I told him what walking in would look like. If he wanted to walk in, I told him about the company and the pilot and the fact that I am not the same person who left California in October, and that whoever he thinks he's showing up for, he needs to understand who he's actually dealing with." "What did he say?" "He said he believed me." Isabella started walking again. "And Maddie," he listened, "while I talked about all of it. He actually listened, not the way he used to, where his eyes were on you but his attention was somewhere else. He was present, in a way I don't have a memory of him being, Isabella. Madeline's voice was careful. The careful voice she used when she was navigating the line between honesty and protectiveness. I want to say something and I need you to hear it without it making you defensive. Say it. One conversation doesn't fix 8 years, I know that. One conversation where he listened and said the right things and brought the necklace back, that's a starting point. Not a destination, and you are 11 weeks into building something real and important and yours. And I do not want you to lose the thread of that because a man finally figured out what he had and came to tell you so. Isabella was quiet for a moment. You're not wrong, she said. I know I'm not wrong. I'm asking if you're okay. I'm okay, Isabella said. I'm genuinely okay. I didn't invite him back. I didn't promise him anything. I told him what it would look like, and I let him decide if that was something he wanted to engage with. That's all, she paused. But I'm not going to pretend I didn't feel something when he sat across from me and talked like a person instead of a performance. I felt something. I'm allowed to feel something. You absolutely are, Madeline said. Just don't let the feeling do the driving. Since when do I let feelings do the driving? Since never. That's why I'm reminding you, Isabella laughed softly. I love you. I love you too. Are you eating dinner? I'm walking home right now. That's not what I asked. Yes. I'm going to eat dinner. Good. Call me tomorrow. She got home, ate dinner, read through the updated integration specs Priya had sent, and went to bed at a reasonable hour. Before she turned out the light, she lay for a moment in the quiet and thought about Nathaniel sitting across from her with no agenda visible in his face, just the simple and apparently very difficult act of being honest. She thought about what Madeline had said. She thought about what she herself had said, that whatever was or wasn't between her and Nathaniel had no bearing on what she was building. That was true. She also knew, with the honesty she had committed to since October, that the two things were not entirely separate, that the person she had become in the past 3 months had been forged in part by the fire of what he had done, and that some part of her, not the sentimental part, but the deep structural part that understood cause and consequence, knew that she would not be sitting in this apartment, in this life with this company, if she had not walked out of that house. That was a complicated thing to sit with. She sat with it. Then she turned out the light and went to sleep. The following morning, she got an email from Nathaniel. It arrived at 6:52, which meant he had been awake early, which was either habitual or evidence of something she was not going to read too far into. It was short. Not the managed brevity of a man who had run the calculation on how short an email needed to be to seem sincere rather than efficient. It was the genuine brevity of a person who understood they did not have the right to take up a lot of space and was choosing their words accordingly. It said, "Thank you for seeing me yesterday. I know you didn't have to. I meant what I said. I'm not asking for anything. I just want you to know that the conversation mattered to me, and whatever you decide about what comes next, I'm going to be working on being the person who deserved to sit across from you. That's not your job to monitor or manage. Just wanted you to know." She read it twice. She typed back, "I know," and sent it before she could reconsider. She put her phone down and opened her laptop and went to work. The weeks that followed moved fast in the way that pre-launch periods always move, with a particular compressed quality of time when there is too much to do and the deadline is fixed, and every day reveals 3 new problems that did not exist the day before. The Providence pilot was growing in scope. One of the clinic directors had mentioned it in a meeting with the network's administrative board, and the board had asked questions, and 2 more clinics had asked to be included, which was extraordinary, and also meant that the January timeline was now genuinely aggressive rather than comfortably ambitious. Isabella called a full team meeting on a Monday morning 3 weeks after Nathaniel's visit. She stood at the whiteboard wall, which was now covered entirely in her handwriting, and she looked at Marcus and Priya and Tom, and she said, "We have a problem, and I'm going to tell you exactly what it is, and then I'm going to tell you what I think we do about it, and then I want your honest response, not your agreeable response." Marcus leaned back in his chair. "Okay, the pilot expanding to 6 is the best thing that has happened to this company so far. It is also going to break us if we treat it like the 4-clinic pilot we planned for. We need another engineer before January. We need someone who can take the provider onboarding off Marcus's plate. Marcus can focus on the platform stability, which is the thing that cannot fail." Priya was already writing. "Where are we on the Series A timeline?" Tom asked. He had the forward-looking instinct of a good communications person, always thinking about what the story looked like from the outside. Stephanie wants to see the pilot data before we formally open the Series A. That's still the plan, but we have a seed reserve that we can pull from for an additional hire, and I think we need to do it. Isabella looked at the room. I'm not making this decision unilaterally. You're all going to be working alongside whoever we bring in. What do you think? Marcus said, without hesitation. Hire. Absolutely hire. I've been covering 3 jobs for 2 months, and I'm good at all of them, but I won't be good at all of them through a 6-clinic launch, and I'd rather tell you that now than 3 weeks into January. Priya said, I have 2 names, people I worked with at the hospital who understand the provider side. Either one of them could be in a chair in 2 weeks if we move fast. Tom said, I'll update the press materials to reflect the expanded scope. The 6-clinic number is stronger than 4, we should use it. Isabella looked at her team. She thought about what it felt like to be in a room full of people who said what they meant and trusted her to hear it, who told her when something was going to break before it broke, who brought her names and solutions in the same breath as the problem. She had assembled these 3 people from nothing, from instinct and interviews, and the particular knowledge of someone who had spent years being surrounded by people who performed competence without actually having it, and had learned to tell the difference. Let's hire, she said. Priya, send me the names today. I'll talk to both of them this week. The meeting ended. She stayed at the whiteboard after they left, looking at the timeline she had drawn, and she felt the thing she had been feeling more and more in these weeks, a kind of deep, structural satisfaction that was different from happiness, in the way that foundations are different from decoration. It was the satisfaction of something being built correctly, of every piece being in its right place because it was put there deliberately, of nothing being accidental. She thought about the California house. She thought about all the years of making sure other things ran correctly, other people's structures, other people's satisfaction. She thought about how good she had been at it, and how invisible that goodness had been. And she thought about the specific waste of a talent that is consistently deployed in service of someone who does not notice it. Then she picked up her marker and went back to the whiteboard, because the timeline was not going to fix itself. Nathaniel, for his part, had gone back to California and done something that surprised even the people who knew him best. He had called his sister, not to update her or manage her reaction or deliver a curated version of events. He had called Diane and told her what had happened in Boston and what Isabella had said and what he had felt cities across from her, and he had asked for Diane's actual opinion, not the softened version, and Diane had given it to him without softening it. She's right, Diane said, about all of it, about what walking in means, about who she is now and who you need to be if you're going to deserve any proximity to that. A pause. Are you actually prepared to be changed by this? Not to perform being changed, because I know what that looks like from you and it's very convincing, but actually be different in the way that she's describing. I don't know yet, Nathaniel said. Diane was quiet then. That's the most honest thing you've said to me in years. He had also, in the weeks following Boston, started paying attention differently. He was in more meetings than he could count every week, had been for years, and what he began to notice, now that the particular scale had been removed from his eyes that made him look at other people, through the filter of their usefulness to him, was how many people in those rooms were doing exactly what Isabella had done for 8 years. Working precisely and invisibly, holding things together, providing the structural support that allowed more visible people to stand upright, and being noticed only in the most transactional sense. If at all he started noticing their names, he started asking questions. His assistant, a woman named Janet who had been with him for 6 years, arrived one Monday morning to find a thank you note on her desk. Not a bonus notification or a performance memo, which were the forms of acknowledgement. Nathaniel had previously considered adequate an actual handwritten note, in his handwriting, that said, I've realized I have not said directly or often enough that the quality of your work is extraordinary, and the reliability of your judgment makes everything I do possible. That is not nothing. I want you to know I know it. Janet read the note 3 times. She looked up when Nathaniel came in and she said, with the directness of a woman who had worked for him long enough to be unimpressed by him in the most respectful way possible, Is everything all right? Getting better, he said. She considered that. Good, she said, and she went back to her work. He was learning something slowly about the texture of genuine attention. That it is not the grand gesture. It is not the dramatic acknowledgement in a crowded room. It is the consistent, quiet daily practice of actually looking at the person in front of you and registering that they are there fully there, with an entire interior life that is not an extension of yours. He had been bad at this. He was not going to be bad at it anymore. He emailed Isabella twice in the 3 weeks following Boston. Both emails were short. Both said exactly what they meant and nothing more. One was about a book he had read, a study on healthcare access gaps in rural communities that referenced a methodology she had mentioned during their coffee, and he said only, read this and thought of MedReach, specifically page 47. No agenda, he included the title and author. The other was a question, straightforwardly asked, is there anything the company needs that I could connect you with? Not an investment offer, not a condition, just resources, if they're useful. She had replied to the book email with, thank you. Page 47 is exactly what I've been arguing for 2 months. How did you find this? She had replied to the resources email with, actually, yes. Do you know anyone at Massachusetts Department of Public Health? We're trying to get in front of the right person there before January. He had known someone. He had made a call. He had connected her with the Deputy Commissioner's office without attaching his name to the introduction in any way that would make it about him rather than about her. The Deputy Commissioner's office had returned Isabella's call within 48 hours. When she found out how the connection had been made, she sat for a moment and then she texted him, "You didn't put your name on it." He had texted back, "It wasn't mine to put on it." She had read that text 4 times. She had not responded immediately. She had put the phone down and gone back to work, and then that evening, on the walk home that had become her daily decompression ritual, she had thought about what it meant that he had understood, without being told that the value of the introduction was entirely in its neutrality, that a connection that came with his name attached would have been a different kind of connection, would have been his door rather than her door, and that she had too many of his doors in her history, and was done walking through them. He had understood that, and he had acted accordingly. She texted back 2 hours after the original message, "Thank you, that was exactly right." His reply came 3 minutes later, "I'm learning." She held the phone for a moment. The cold Boston air moved around her. A cab went past. Somewhere ahead a couple was arguing about something ordinary and temporary, the kind of argument that would be forgotten by morning. She put the phone in her pocket and kept walking. December arrived with the full force of a Boston winter, the kind that requires a person to make peace with cold or lose their mind fighting it. The MedReach office got a space heater for the corner where Priya sat because the radiator by her desk was unreliable, and Marcus brought in a second cough maker because one was not sufficient for the pace they were moving at, and the new hire, a woman named Daniela Reyes, one of Priya's recommendations, who had 12 years of hospital administration's and the particular gift of making providers feel understood rather than processed, started on December the 4th and had, within her first week, reorganized the entire onboarding workflow in a way that made Priya's 19-column project plan actually executable. Isabella watched Daniela work and felt the specific satisfaction of a good hire. The way you feel a good structural decision, it holds weight without needing to announce itself. The team had dinner together the Friday of Daniela's first week. Not a formal team dinner, not an event Isabella had planned. Marcus had suggested it, casually Thursday afternoon, and everyone had said yes, and they had ended up at a Thai restaurant 4 blocks from the office, where the food was excellent, and the table was slightly too small for 4 people, and nobody cared. They talked about work for the first 20 minutes because they were who they were. Then Tom told a story about a disastrous family Thanksgiving that had the table laughing until Priya wiped her eyes. Then Daniela talked about her daughter, who was 7, and had decided she wanted to be a marine biologist, and the specific challenge of explaining marine biology to a 7-year-old in a landlocked city. Then Marcus talked about the apartment he was finally going to commit to leasing because he had been in a month-to-month since he'd left his last job, and the instability was starting to feel less like freedom and more like avoidance. Isabella listened and talked and laughed and felt the warmth of a table full of people she had chosen and who had chosen her back, and she thought that this specific thing, this dinner, these people, this work they were all doing together, was worth more than everything she had given up to get here. She thought about Nathaniel saying in that reception area, "I want to know you, the actual you." She thought that the actual her was at this table right now, slightly cramped, eating excellent pad see ew, listening to a story about a 7-year-old who wanted to be a marine biologist. She was glad he had not been there to see it, not because she was hiding from him, but because this was hers. This specific, ordinary, beautiful thing was entirely hers. and she was still learning to be fully in it without the reflex to make it make sense to someone else. She was getting better at that. The week before Christmas, Isabella got a call from Patricia Huang. She picked up immediately because Patricia Huang did not make small talk, and if she was calling, it was about something specific. "I want to tell you something," Patricia said. "And I'm telling you because you deserve to hear it from a person, not to read it somewhere." A pause. "I was at a dinner last night. Healthcare policy people, some investors, a few academic people. Nathaniel Whitmore was there." Isabella's grip on the phone tightened slightly. "Someone brought up MedReach," Patricia continued. "I don't know who, but it came up and several people had things to say about it. And when it got to Nathaniel," she paused again, and Patricia Huang was not a woman who paused unless the pause was serving a purpose. "He spoke about it for 4 minutes. I timed it. Talked about the model, the Providence pilot, the gap you're addressing, why it matters. He described your methodology in accurate detail." He said another pause. He said, "I know the founder personally, and she is the most rigorous thinker I have encountered in 20 years in this industry. Whatever MedReach does, it will be worth paying attention to." Isabella said nothing. "He said that," Patricia said, "to a room full of people who respect his opinion about where to pay attention. And then he said nothing else about it. Nothing about any personal connection or history. Just let the statement stand on its own, a breath." "I wanted you to know," Isabella looked at her desk, at the whiteboard wall through her office window, at the integration timeline and the clinic contacts, and the name Daniela had written in purple marker in the upper left corner that said launch -23 days. "Thank you," she said. "He's changed," Patricia said. "I'm not telling you what to do with that. I'm just telling you what I saw." "I know," Isabella said. "I know he has." She sat for a long time. She thought about a man standing in a room full of people who respected his opinion and choosing to spend 4 minutes of that credibility on her. Not to announce himself, not to connect himself, just to say what he believed to be true about something she had built, and then stop talking. She thought about page 47 of the Healthcare Access book. She thought about the introduction to the deputy commissioner that had arrived without his name on it. She thought about the email that had said, simply, "I'm learning." She thought about 8 years of the opposite of all of that. She thought about how human change actually worked not in grand gestures but in small, consistent actions, repeated over time that gradually accumulated into something you could point to and call different. She thought about her own change, which had looked exactly like that. Not a single dramatic moment, but 100 small decisions, each one made on the foundation of the one before, each one building that had taken 3 months to become visible to the outside world, but had been happening from the inside. From the moment she had stepped out of that California house. She picked up her phone. She texted Nathaniel. "Patricia Huang told me about the dinner." 3 minutes passed. "Then I meant every word." She typed, "I know, that's what surprised me." A longer pause. Then, "Can I ask you something?" She typed, "Yes." He typed, "Are you happy?" She looked at that question for a long time. It was the most unguarded thing he had ever sent her. Not, "How are you?" Not, "How is the company?" Not any of the managed questions that kept the conversation in a navigable channel. Just, "Are you happy?" Direct. Simple. The question of a person who actually wanted to know the answer regardless of what it cost them to hear it. She typed back, "Yes," for the first time in a long time. Genuinely, yes. Another pause, then, "Good, that's what I wanted to know." She put the phone down. She went back to the integration document. She had a launch to prepare for, but something had settled in her chest with that exchange, some knot she had not known was there until it loosened. Because happiness, when it is finally real and finally yours, wants to be known, not performed, not displayed, not offered up as proof of something just known. By the right people in the right way at the right time. He had asked in exactly the right way. She had not expected that. She was allowing herself to be surprised. Christmas came and went. Isabella spent it in Boston with Madeline and Madeline's sister, and her sister's husband and their 2 children, who were 8 and 5 and had very strong opinions about every board game and very little patience for the rules of any of them. Isabella sat on the floor of Madeline's living room and played 3 rounds of a game she did not fully understand and lost every one of them, and was happier than she had been on Christmas in years. She called her mother. They talked for an hour. Her mother asked about the company, and Isabella told her everything. And her mother listened the way she had always listened, with the full attention of someone who understood that listening was itself a form of love, and who had been waiting, without pressure, without complaint, for her daughter to find her way back to herself. At the end of the call, her mother said, "Are you wearing the necklace?" Isabella touched it. "Every day." "Good," her mother said. "It looks best on someone who knows why they're wearing it." She flew back to Boston on the 27th. The office reopened on the 28th. Launch was 16 days away. The week between Christmas and New Year was the most intense work Isabella had done in 3 months, which was saying something. 6 clinic directors, 1,700 enrolled patients in the pilot cohort, a technical integration that Marcus was running on 4 hours of sleep, a provider onboarding process that Daniela was executing with the focused grace of someone who had been waiting her whole career for a workflow this clean. Tom was managing incoming press inquiries, because the word had gotten out in the Boston health tech community that MedReach was launching something real, and real things attracted attention. On New Year's Eve, at 8 in the evening, Isabella was still in the office. She had told the team to go. Marcus had protested for 15 minutes before Daniela had physically picked up his coat from the hook by the door and held it out to him until he put it on. Priya had given Isabella a look that communicated everything without requiring words. Tom had said, "At least watch the ball drop," as if that were a reasonable suggestion for a person sitting at a desk down by integrate documents. She had told them all to have a wonderful night. She was alone in the office when her phone rang. She looked at the screen. "Nathaniel," she answered. "You're working," he said, "not a question. Happy New Year to you too. It's 8 o'clock. The launch is in 16 days. A pause. "How is it looking?" "Terrifying," she said in the right way. He laughed. It was a genuine laugh, not the boardroom version, something smaller and less produced. She had heard that laugh before, years ago, and then not for a long time. And hearing it now was a complicated thing, the way familiar things become complicated when enough time has passed to change the context. "I want to say something," he said, "and I don't want you to feel like you have to respond to it. I'm saying it because it's true and because you deserve to hear it said out loud." She leaned back in her chair. "Okay, what you're doing, what you have built in 3 months with your own hands, from nothing, while processing everything that happened, it is one of the most impressive things I have ever seen. And I have been in this industry for 20 years, and I have seen people build impressive things." His voice was quiet. "Entirely without strategy, I was so certain that the most important thing in any room was whatever I was doing. I thought the gravitational center was me. I was wrong. I was wrong in a way that cost you enormously, and cost me something I'm only beginning to understand the full size of." A pause. "I don't know what comes next between us. I don't have a plan for that, which for me is genuinely new, but I know that whatever it is, it starts with me understanding that I am not the most important thing in your room. You are." Isabella sat in the quiet of the empty office. Outside, the city was beginning to make its New Year's noise, horns and voices, and the distant sound of music from somewhere close to the river. She thought about 8 years of being the background. She thought about the moment she had reached for her wedding ring and taken it off and placed it on the marble table. She thought about everything that had happened between that moment and this one, the air mattress in Madeline's study, the pitch to Douglas Park, Stephanie Reeves saying, "You built this," the basil cutting in the plastic container, Marcus crying a little, 6 clinics in Providence, a launch 16 days away. She thought about what it cost to become someone who could sit in this chair in this office on New Year's Eve and know, not hope, not perform, not pretend, but actually know that she was the most important thing in her own room. "I know," she said. "I know you know," Nathaniel said. "I'm saying it anyway, because it needed to be said by me." She was quiet for a moment. "Where are you?" she asked. "My office, in California, a beat. I'm working too." She smiled despite herself. "We're very similar in some ways. You're more disciplined than I am," he said. "You always were. I just never paid attention to what that looked like. You're paying attention now." "I'm trying," he said. "Turns out attention is a practice, not a talent. You have to choose it every day in every room." A pause. "I'm not very good at it yet, but I'm getting better. That's all anything is," Isabella said. "Getting better at it." The noise outside the office was building. Somewhere down the street someone was setting off early fireworks. The small ones, the kind that were probably not entirely legal in the city limits, but that Boston had never managed to fully discourage. "Happy New Year, Isabella," Nathaniel said. "Happy New Year." "Nathaniel," she said. She hung up. She sat in the office for another 10 minutes, not working, just sitting, looking at the whiteboard wall and the timeline and the word launch, and the number that was now 15 days, because somewhere in the course of that phone call midnight had quietly arrived and made it so. 15 days. She put on her coat. She turned off the lights. She walked out into the new year, into the cold and the noise of the city celebrating itself, and she thought about what was coming, not just the launch. Not just the pilot, but all of it, the long unwritten, everything that existed past the point where she had stopped being afraid of it. She thought about a man in California who was learning to pay attention. She thought about herself at this time last year, in a California house with the right cheese, on the right plate for their guests, and how impossible this specific moment would have seemed from that specific chair. She clasped the pearl necklace through her coat. She thought about her mother. She thought about the word forward. She walked into it. The launch happened on a Tuesday, January 14th, 7 in the morning, Boston time. Isabella was already at the office when Marcus arrived at 6:45, which meant she had been there since at least 6, which meant she had probably been there since 5:30, which Marcus did not say out loud because he had learned in 4 months of working for her that some mornings were not about conversation. Some mornings were about being present in the quiet before the thing you had built met the world for the first time. And those mornings required a particular kind of silence that should not be interrupted by well-meaning colleagues asking if she had eaten breakfast. He put a coffee on her desk without knocking. She looked up. "Thank you. How are you feeling?" She looked at him steadily. "Like I'm about to find out if everything I believe about this is actually true." "It is," he said. "You don't know that yet." "I know the work," he said. "The work is true. Whatever the day does, the work is true." He picked up his own coffee. "That's what I know." She looked at him for a moment. Then she nodded once, the nod of someone accepting something real, rather than performing gratitude for a platitude. "Let's go," she said. By 9 in the morning, MedReach was live in 6 clinics across the Providence Healthcare Network. 1,743 patients had been enrolled in the pilot cohort. The platform was running. The integrations were holding. Marcus had set up a monitoring dashboard on the large screen in the main office space, and for the first hour they all stood around it at intervals, watching the numbers, watching the system do what they had built it to do. At 9:22, the first patient used the platform to schedule a preventive care appointment that would have cost them $460 out of pocket through the standard system. Through MedReach, it cost them $38. Priya saw the transaction come through on her screen. She turned around in her chair. She looked at Isabella. She did not say anything. She did not need to. Isabella looked at the number on the screen. $38. The specific, concrete, real-world translation of everything she had been arguing for in documents and pitch decks and 4 in the morning working sessions for the past 3 months. This, not a projection, an actual person, in an actual clinic, getting actual care they could actually afford. She turned around and walked into her office and closed the door and stood at the window for exactly 90 seconds. She allowed herself 90 seconds. Then she opened the door and went back to work. By noon, 47 appointments had been scheduled through the platform. By 3 in the afternoon, the number was 112. By end of day, it was 231. Tom had a press release ready. He sent it at 4:15 to the list of journalists who covered healthcare technology. And by 5 o'clock, he had 3 interview requests and a request for a comment from a publication that Isabella had been reading as a benchmark of where the serious healthcare policy was. She did the first interview over the phone, standing in her office, and she talked for 20 minutes about the gap and the model and the Providence pilot and what the numbers meant. And at the end, the journalist said, "Why hasn't this been done before? The model seems almost obvious in retrospect." "Most true things do," Isabella said. "Once someone does the work of making them visible." She sent Stephanie Reeves the day's numbers at 5:30. Stephanie replied, "In 4 minutes, this is what we expected. Better, actually. We need to talk about Series A timing." "Can you do Thursday?" She replied, "Yes." She put the phone down. She looked at the whiteboard wall through her office window. At the timeline that had lunch written on it in large letters and now had a red check mark next to it in Priya's handwriting, because Priya had apparently taken the marker and added the check mark at some point during the afternoon without announcing it, which was exactly the kind of thing Priya would do. Isabella smiled at the check mark for a long time. She texted Madeline, "It's real." Madeline replied in 30 seconds, "I know, I've been hitting refresh on the MedReach website all day like a person with no self-control. Then come to dinner, non-negotiable, bring nothing. Then 3 seconds later, actually bring wine." She texted Nathaniel too. She had not planned to, and then she did, because the day was what it was, and he had been part of getting here in ways that were real and specific and honest, and pretending otherwise would have been its own kind of dishonesty. She typed, "We launched today. 231 appointments. Real people getting care they couldn't afford yesterday." He replied in 2 minutes, "I know. I've been watching the health tech news since 9 this morning." "And then you did that, not the model, not the platform. You the understanding behind it, that's yours." She read it once. She put the phone in her pocket. She went to dinner. Madeline had candles on the table, which she had not mentioned on the phone, and the good wine and food she had made herself, which was unusual and significant because Madeline's relationship with cooking was complicated. And the fact that she had cooked meant the evening was being treated as something that warranted the effort. They sat across from each other, and Madeline poured the wine and said, "Tell me everything. Start from when you woke up." Isabella told her everything. She told it the way you tell a story to the person who has been in it with you, from the beginning with the shorthand and the specific details, and the parts that would not make sense to anyone who had not been there, like the 90 seconds at the window, and the check mark on the whiteboard, and the exact sound Priya's chair made when she turned around to look at Isabella after the first transaction came through. Madeline listened to every word. When Isabella finished, Madeline raised her glass. "To the woman who built a thing," she said. "To the friend who didn't let me talk myself out of it," Isabella said. They clinked glasses, they ate. At some point, Madeline said, quietly setting down her fork, "He texted you today, didn't he?" It was not quite a question. "Yes," Isabella said. "What did he say?" she told her. Madeline was quiet for a moment, turning her glass by the stem the way she did when she was thinking something through. "That's not a small thing," she said finally. "What he said. The way he said it, I know he gave you the credit. Specifically, without hedging it or connecting it back to himself. I know. That's not who he was a year ago." "Maddie," Madeline looked at her, "what do you want? Not what makes sense, not what's practical, not what protects you. What do you actually want?" Isabella held her glass and thought about the question the way she had learned to think about the important question, not looking for the right answer, but looking for the honest one, the one that was already there, if she was willing to look directly at it without flinching. "I want to see who he becomes," she said, "not who he was. Not who he's performing being right now. I want to see who he is after another 6 months of this, the consistency, the small choices, the moments when no one is watching and he still chooses correctly." She paused. "I want to give it the time it needs to be real before I decide anything about it." "That's very wise," Madeline said. "I had a good teacher," Isabella said. Madeline pointed at her. "Don't make me cry on launch day. I have a reputation." Isabella laughed. The full, real laugh, the one that came from the deepest part of her chest, the one she had not had easy access to for more years than she wanted to count. The Thursday call with Stephanie Reeves was the beginning of the Series A process, which was an entirely different animal from the seed round larger. More complex, more people in the room, more due diligence, more scrutiny of every assumption and every number and every strategic decision Isabella had made since founding the company. It was also, Stephanie told her at the start of the call, being led by Stephanie's fund with 2 co-investors who had reached out independently after seeing the Providence launch numbers. "They came to us," Stephanie said. "We didn't pitch them. They saw the day one data and they called, a pause that had satisfaction in it. That's what proof of concept looks like, Isabella. That's what you built." Isabella was on her feet for that call, pacing her office the way she paced when she was thinking fast. "What's the timeline if we move efficiently? Term sheet in 6 weeks. Close in 12, and the valuation conversation will be easier than you think," Stephanie said. "The day one numbers give us real ground to stand on. You're not asking anyone to believe in a projection anymore. You're showing them what already happened." When the call ended, Isabella stood in her office and felt the particular vertiginous feeling of standing at the edge of something larger than what came before. The seed round had been the beginning. The Series A was the beginning of a different scale, entirely more capital, more infrastructure, more people whose livelihoods would be connected to what she built and how she built it, and the quality of her judgment under pressure. She was not afraid. She was, to use the word she had become fluent in, terrified, and she knew by now exactly what that meant. She opened her office door. "Marcus," she called Priya. "Tom, Daniela, can you all come in here for a minute?" They assembled. She told them about the Series A. She told them about the co-investors who had come in without being asked. She told them what Stephanie had said about the day one numbers. She watched their faces move through the information, Marcus's immediate pivot to what this meant technically, Priya's instantaneous mental updating of the project plan, Tom's visible calculation of the communications implications. Daniela's quiet, steady nod of someone who had seen enough of the healthcare system to understand the Aklitzending would make possible. We are going to need to expand, Isabella said, infrastructure. Team, scope, we're going to need to do it fast and do it right. I'm going to need all of you more than I have needed you so far, which is already more than I know how to adequately acknowledge. She looked at each of them. I need to know if you're in, Marcus said, without hesitating. I've been in since the day you hired me. Nothing changes, Priya said. I'm updating the project plan tonight. It will have 23 columns. Minimum, Tom said. When do I get to write the press release? Daniela said, I've been waiting my whole career for something worth this much effort. I'm not going anywhere. Isabella looked at her team. She thought about the first morning she had walked into Madeline's kitchen with a small overnight bag and an idea she had been sitting on for 2 years, and how impossible this room would have seemed from that kitchen. How impossible these people. How impossible the checkmark on the whiteboard and the 231 appointments and Stephanie Reeves saying, the investors came to us. Good, she said. Let's get to work. February moved fast and March faster. The Series A process was as demanding as anything Isabella had done, not in the way that grief is demanding, not in the way that survival is demanding, but in the specific professional way of a thing that requires every ounce of your competence deployed simultaneously and consistently, day after day, with no room for a bad call or a lost hour or a moment of doubt that you do not immediately convert back into clarity. She slept 6 hours a night. She ate because Madeline enforced it. She ran 3 mornings a week, not because she had been a runner before, but because Marcus ran and had suggested it once. And she had said yes almost accidentally and discovered that 30 minutes of physical motion at 6 in the morning before the day started was the most reliable way she had found to clear the overnight residue of complexity from her brain and arrive at the office with something resembling a fresh perspective. She and Nathaniel talked on the phone every 10 days or so. Not scheduled, not managed. He would call or she would call, and they would talk for 40 minutes or an hour, and the conversations had gradually shifted from the careful, tentative quality of the early ones into something more natural, still aware of its own weight, still moving slowly but no longer performing the awareness. Just 2 people talking about the Series A and his portfolio and a healthcare policy paper she had read and a management decision he was trying to work through, and occasionally about themselves. One evening in February he asked her about her mother. She told him about the Ohio kitchen and the pearl necklace and the specific quality of her mother's listening that had always made Isabella feel that her ideas were worth having. She talked for 20 minutes and he did not interrupt once. And at the end he said, I would have liked to have known her better. I never asked the right questions when I had the chance. No, Isabella said. You didn't. I'm sorry for that. I know, she said. She'd like who you're being now. A pause. That means a lot, he said. More than I know how to say. In March, Celeste Warren appeared in a way that neither of them had anticipated. A journalist writing a profile of Nathaniel for a business magazine, the kind of piece that came around every few years as his company grew, had interviewed Celeste as a former business partner. The piece was professional and unembellished for the most part, but Celeste had made a comment buried in the 4th paragraph that was designed with the specific precision of someone who knows exactly how to say a damaging thing while appearing to say nothing at all. She had said, Nathaniel's personal life has always been complicated. His ex-wife's new venture is interesting, of course, though I think those of us who know the full picture might be curious of much of intellectual foundation there was truly hers to begin with. Isabella read it on a Thursday morning. She read it once, then again, then put the article down on her desk and sat very still. Marcus appeared in her doorway 30 seconds later. He had also read it. His expression was the careful, controlled expression of someone who was very angry on behalf of someone else and was managing it with effort. Isabella, I saw it, she said. What do you want to do? She thought about it for exactly as long as it deserved. Nothing, she said. Marcus stared at her. The pilot data speaks for itself. The Series A investors have done their own due diligence. They know who built this and how and on what foundation. A comment in a profile piece changes none of that. She looked at Marcus steadily. The work is the answer. It always is. He looked at her for a moment. You're sure? I'm sure. He nodded. He disappeared. She picked up her phone and called Nathaniel because she thought he should know before he read it himself, and also because she wanted to hear how he handled it, because after 5 months of paying attention to who he was becoming, she understood that moments of friction were more revealing than moments of ease. He picked up on the second ring. I saw it, he said. Before she could speak, I was about to call you. Okay, she said. What are you going to do? I've already called the journalist, he said. I told him that Celeste's comment was inaccurate, that I have personal and professional knowledge of the origin of MedReach and its intellectual foundation, and that I would be providing a written statement for the record. His voice was entirely level. Not the boardroom level, the real level, the one underneath. I told him that if the comment ran without correction, I would be raising the question of editorial standards with his editor directly. Isabella was quiet for a moment. You didn't ask me first, she said. No, he said. Because it was true and it needed to be said, and you shouldn't have to fight for the credit of your own work. That's not your job. I did that job badly for 8 years. I'm doing it right now. A pause. If you want me to pull the statement back, I will. This is your company. Your call. She thought about what it meant that he had said that. Your company, your call, not his decision, not his rescue mission. His responsibility offered up for her to accept or decline on her own terms. Leave the statement, she said. Okay, thank you. Don't thank me, he said quietly. This is just what's true. The correction ran in the online version of the article by end of day. A note added to the fourth paragraph in editorial standard format, indicating that the publication had received information from Nathaniel Whitmore disputing the characterization and that the original comment had been included in error. Tom showed it to her at 5 o'clock. His expression was the expression of a 26-year-old who was learning something about how the world actually worked when the right people chose to tell the truth. The statement he gave was strong, Tom said, really specific. Not just a denial. He cited your academic history, your research background, the Johns Hopkins work. He had details. He looked at her. He knows your resume better than most people who've known you for years. He's been paying attention, Isabella said. Is that are you two? She looked at him. He stopped. Right, he said, none of my business. Going back to my desk, she almost laughed. The Series A closed on a Thursday in April. 6 months to the week from the night Isabella Monroe had walked out of a California house with a small overnight bag and a wedding ring sitting on a marble table. It was not the largest Series A in the history of healthcare technology. It was not a number that would make headlines for its size. But it was real and it was hers, and it was built on proof. Not promise on data, not projection, on a model that had already shown what it could do in 6 clinics in Providence before asking anyone to believe in where it could go. Stephanie called her the morning the paperwork was finalized. Congratulations, Isabella. Thank you for believing in it when it was still just a plan. I believed in the person who made the plan, Stephanie said. The plan was good, the person was better. After the call, Isabella sat alone in her office for a few minutes. She thought about what 6 months looked like from the inside versus the outside. From the outside, she knew it looked like a success story with a clean arc. Woman leaves difficult situation, builds company, raises fund, changes the healthcare system. Triumphant. The kind of story people told at conferences as an example of something. From the inside, it looked like an air mattress in a study and a basil cutting in a plastic container, and 4 a.m. self-doubt and 90 seconds at a window on launch day, and the specific exhaustion of building something real while also rebuilding yourself, simultaneously on the same timeline with no days off from either project. Both versions were true. The outside version was the result. The inside version was the cost, and the cost was worth it. She was certain of that. She had been certain of it since the morning after the pitch to Douglas Park, when she had woken up with the feeling still in her chest. But it was important to know what you had paid. Not to resent it, not to perform it, just to know, clearly and honestly, what the thing had cost, so you understood what you were protecting when you chose to protect it. She picked up her phone. She called her mother. Her mother picked up on the first ring, which meant she had been waiting. Her mother had always known when to wait by the phone. The Series A closed, Isabella said. Her mother made a sound that was not quite a word. The sound of someone who had been holding something for a long time and has just been given permission to set it down. Mom, Isabella said. I'm here, her mother said. I'm right here. I wish you could see the office, Isabella said. It's small and the radiator by Priya's desk is unreliable, and Marcus has put exactly too many coffee mugs on his shelf. But it's ours. It's completely ours. I can see it, her mother said. I can hear it in your voice. I've been hearing it in your voice for months. Every time you called, I thought, there she is. There's my girl. Her voice was steady, but only barely. There's the one I knew was in there. Isabella pressed her free hand against her eyes. Not crying, almost. I'm wearing the necklace, she said. I know, her mother said. I know you are. The company celebration happened that evening. in the same Thai restaurant where they had eaten on Daniela's first Friday, because it had become, without anyone formally declaring it, the MedReach team's place. They pushed 2 tables together. They ordered too much food. Tom's Gold short speech that started with a joke about the 19-column project plan and ended with something genuine about what it meant to work on something that mattered. And everyone at the table knew he meant it. Isabella looked around the table at Marcus and Priya and Tom and Daniela and the 2 new hires they had brought on in March, a second engineer named Jay and a patient outreach coordinator named Simone who had worked in community health for 10 years and brought with her a knowledge of how underserved populations actually interfaced with the healthcare system that no academic study could have provided, and she felt the weight of what she was responsible for and the rightness of being responsible for it and the specific joy of having chosen these people and been chosen by them. Madeline was there too, because Madeline was always where she was supposed to be. At the end of the evening, walking out, Madeline took her arm and said quietly, "6 months ago, I know," Isabella said. "Do you actually know? Do you actually have a clear picture of what 6 months ago looked like versus right now?" Isabella thought about it. Truly thought about it, the way Madeline's questions always required you to truly think. "I think I'm too close to see it completely," she said honestly. "I think I'll understand it more clearly in another year." "That's probably right," Madeline said. "But even from inside it, you can feel it, can't you? The difference." "Every single day," Isabella said. "Every morning when I walk into that office and the day starts and I know that everything in that room exists because I made a decision to walk out a door 6 months ago." She paused. "Not because he pushed me out, because I chose to go. That's the part that matters, the choosing." Madeline squeezed her arm. "Yes," she said, "that's the part." The conversation with Nathaniel that changed everything happened on a Saturday in May. He had asked, 2 weeks earlier, if she would be in New York for the Healthcare Innovation Conference that was happening the second weekend of the month. She was speaking on a panel he had mentioned he would be attending. They had left it as a possibility without defining it further, which was how most of their interactions existed now, as possibilities, held lightly with no pressure applied in either direction. She saw him at the conference before the panel, across a crowded room, and the thing that happened when she saw him was not what she had expected. Not the complicated grief-adjacent feeling of the early months, not the cautious assessment of the November visit. It was simpler and more direct than either of those things. It was the feeling of seeing someone you know. Someone you have been watching become something new and can see clearly enough now to recognize that the becoming is real. He made his way across the room. He looked well. Not the curated well of a man who had managed his appearance, the actual well of someone who had been sleeping properly and thinking honestly and doing the work of being better at a thing they had been bad at. "You look good," he said. "You too," she said, and meant it in the unguarded way she had not meant anything about him in years. They had coffee before her panel. They talked about the conference and the Series A and a health care policy shift that was moving through the Massachusetts legislature that would, if it passed, create structural support for exactly the model MedReach was building on. They talked with the ease of 2 people who had been talking long enough to have found the register that was honest without being either performative or defended. At some point he said, "I want to ask you something and I want you to answer me honestly, even if the answer is no." "Ask," she said. "Is there space for me? Not in the company, not in the professional version of your life. In the actual version." He was looking at her directly, the way he had learned to look, without the management layer. "I'm not asking for what we had. I don't want what we had. I'm asking if there's space for what we could be, with everything we both know now, with who you are now and who I'm trying to be." A pause. "I know it might be too much to ask. I know I might have used up whatever I had. But I'm asking honestly because I think you deserve the honest version of the question." Isabella looked at him. She thought about everything she had told Madeline in February. I want to see who he becomes, the consistency, the small choices, the moments when no one is watching and he still chooses correctly. She thought about the months since then, the book on page 47, the introduction without his name on it, the correction to the journalist, the New Year's Eve call, the patience, the consistency, the small daily evidence of a man who was not performing change but actually doing it, in the unglamorous incremental way that real change happens. She thought about what it meant to be the person she was now, not closed, not defended, not the woman who had walked out of the California house still carrying the reflexes of someone who had learned to make herself small. But not naive either, not the woman who had stood in that kitchen for 8 years without asking herself the honest question. She was someone who could hold both at the same time. She was someone who had earned the right to choose clearly. There might be, she said, I'm not saying yes to everything. I'm saying the door isn't closed. She met his eyes. But I need you to understand something, and it's the most important thing I'm going to say to you. Tell me, he said. I am never going back to being invisible, she said. Not in any room, not in any relationship, not for any amount of comfort or security or history. The woman who made herself small to fit into your life, she's gone. She left in October and she's not coming back. She paused. What I'm offering, if I'm offering anything, is the actual version of me. The one that runs a company and has a team counting on her and walks to work in the Boston cold and has dinner with her best friend every Tuesday and wears her mother's pearl necklace every single day because she finally understands what it was mean. She looked at him without flinching. That's what's available. Take it or leave it. He did not hesitate. I'll take it, he said, every bit of it. She searched his face for the performance, for the calculation behind the words, for the managed tone she had learned to recognize years too late, the one that sounded like presence but was actually strategy. She found none of it. She found only a man sitting across from her at a small table in a hotel conference room, looking at her with the full, unguarded attention she had waited 8 years to see and had finally stopped waiting for, and had found in the meantime that she did not need, and was now with complete awareness and complete freedom to accept. Okay, she said. It was the smallest word for the largest decision. Okay, he said. She finished her coffee. She went and gave her panel presentation. And she was excellent, the way she was always excellent when she was fully in something. And 3 people came up to her afterward to ask for her contact information, and she gave it without the old reflex of looking to see if she was taking up too much space. She was not taking up too much space. She was taking up exactly the right amount. The story of Isabella Monroe did not end with a grand reconciliation or a dramatic reversal or the kind of Hollywood resolution that ties every thread into a bow and sends everyone home satisfied. It ended the way real lives end their chapters, not with a closing but with a continuation. With the next morning and the next problem and the next conversation and the next small decision made from the clearest possible understanding of who you are and what you are worth. MedReach expanded to 14 clinics by the end of the year, then 22. Then it was in 3 states, and the Providence model had been written about in 4 peer-reviewed journals and 2 major newspapers, and one of those conference keynote presentations where they put your name in large letters on a screen and people in an auditorium listen to you talk about the thing you built, and you think each time about the kitchen table where it started, and the air mattress and the basil cutting, and the 90 seconds at the window on launch day. Isabella Monroe became known, genuinely known, in the industry and beyond it, not as the wife of Nathaniel Whitmore, but as the founder of MedReach, the woman who had looked at a broken system and built the tool that started fixing it. Nathaniel Whitmore became known for something different, too. Not for being changed by Isabella, that framing would have made her a supporting character in his story again, and those days were over. He became known for becoming, slowly and without announcement, the kind of man who noticed the people the room wasn't looking at, who asked the right questions, who paid attention to the right things. He was not a different person. He was finally the better version of the one he had always had the capacity to be. And Isabella Monroe, who had once been told she had nothing without him, had built a life so full and so entirely her own that the statement had become not just false but almost comically irrelevant. The kind of thing that could only have been said by someone who had never actually looked at her, and could only have been believed, however briefly, by a woman who had temporarily lost the thread of herself. She had found it again. She had built it into something no one could take from her. She wore her mother's pearl necklace every single day. Not to remember who she was, because she already knew.